It was supposed to be another routine press conference. Elon Musk stood before a room full of journalists, investors, and curious onlookers. The conference was all about the latest advancements in SpaceX, the Mars mission, and Tesla's breakthroughs. The excitement in the room was palpable, but little did Elon know that a single question was about to change everything. The lights above flickered slightly, and the hum of the cameras filled the space. Elon had just finished answering a question about the future of space travel when the next person stood up. He was used to the usual questions, numbers, figures, plans for the next big project, but this time, the voice that echoed in the room was different. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? An elderly woman, barely 5 feet tall, with soft silver hair and a weathered face, raised her hand. Her eyes were sharp, as though she had seen more of life than most could ever dream. Elon didn't think much of it at first. He was used to journalists who were eager to get their scoop. But when she was called on, her question threw him completely off balance. "Do you believe that God is watching over you?" she asked. The room went silent. The usual buzz of murmured voices faded away, and everyone turned toward her. Elon, frozen for a moment, blinked rapidly. He had expected many questions about Mars, about AI, about electric cars, but this was entirely unexpected. For a brief second, he wasn't sure how to respond. He scanned the faces of the crowd. Some seemed perplexed. Others were looking at him, waiting for his reaction. Was this a joke? A setup? A philosophical question in a room full of tech enthusiasts? The elderly woman didn't blink. She just stood there, looking at him with a steady gaze, as if she wasn't going to back down until she had an answer. Elon could feel the weight of her question bearing down on him. "Excuse me?" Elon stammered, breaking the silence. "Could you repeat that?" The woman smiled softly, almost like she knew something he didn't. She didn't repeat the question verbatim. Instead, she elaborated. "Do you think there's a higher power, a force, guiding your life? With everything you've accomplished, SpaceX, Tesla, even when things seemed impossible, do you ever wonder if someone up there is watching over you?" The question felt like a punch to the gut, unexpected and raw. Elon stood there for a moment, looking at the woman, and then shifted his gaze back to the audience. He could feel the pressure mounting on him. This wasn't a question about rockets or cars. This was a question about life itself. He thought about his mother, May Musk, who had always believed in God, who prayed for him when times were tough. But Elon had always been a skeptic, a rationalist. He didn't believe in things he couldn't see or measure. He had built his empire on logic, reason, and the pursuit of the impossible. God, faith, spirituality. These were not things he thought about in the same way he thought about fuel efficiency or artificial intelligence. But something about the woman's question stirred something inside him. A doubt, perhaps, or a curiosity he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. He cleared his throat. I don't know," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I guess I've never really thought about it like that." The room was still silent, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for more. Elon realized that his response had not just answered the question. It had opened up a door to something deeper, something more personal than anything he had ever discussed in public. The woman nodded slowly, as if she had anticipated this response. "It's okay," she said gently. "Not everyone is ready for the question, but you might want to think about it. Life is a lot more than what we can see. Sometimes, we just need to stop and listen." Elon stood there for a moment, his mind racing. He had expected a lot from this press conference, but not this. Not a question that hit so close to home. His mind drifted to memories of his childhood, growing up in South Africa with a father who was distant, a mother who was supportive but often worried. The world around him had always seemed so uncertain, so difficult to understand. He had never been taught to rely on faith, to believe in something greater than himself. But now, in this room full of people, he wondered if maybe there was something more. The elderly woman sat down, her mission seemingly complete. Elon felt a strange mix of emotions: confusion, curiosity, maybe even a sense of fear. The questions were no longer about rockets or electric vehicles. They were about him, about the man behind the vision, about the soul of a man who had accomplished so much but never really stopped to question why or how. The press conference continued, but Elon couldn't shake the question from his mind. He had always prided himself on thinking logically, on relying on facts and data. But this simple question, so straightforward, so direct, had cracked something open in him. The rest of the day was a blur. He finished the conference, answered more questions, and headed back to his office. But as he sat there in his chair, staring out the window at the world beyond, the woman's question echoed in his mind. Do you believe that God is watching over you? And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk didn't know the answer. Elon sat in the quiet of his office, the question still echoing in his mind. It wasn't the first time he had felt unsettled, of course, but this question, simple yet profound, was different. His thoughts drifted back, as they often did, to his childhood. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon had always been a curious child. He was fascinated by technology, often taking apart his toys to figure out how they worked. His obsession with building things began early, but so did his feeling of being an outsider. His father, Elon Musk, was a complicated figure, distant, strict, and, at times, cold. He had little patience for his son's dreams of reaching beyond the stars. Errol was a brilliant man in his own right, but he didn't understand Elon's drive, nor did he care to. He was a man who believed in practicality, in building a life through hard work and discipline, but without room for imagination or faith. In contrast, Elon's mother, May, was a force of nature. She was supportive, nurturing, and always encouraged him to think big, to dream of things that seemed impossible. She would tell him stories of the importance of perseverance and self-belief. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do, she'd say. If you believe in yourself, there's nothing you can't achieve. But despite his mother's encouragement, Elon never quite felt at peace with the world around him. His relationship with his father had always been strained, and the feeling of being different only intensified as he grew older. School was no escape. Elon was often bullied, especially for his love of books and his tendency to get lost in his thoughts. The other kids at school didn't understand him, and he didn't understand them. He felt like he was from a different world altogether. By the time he was a teenager, Elon's sense of isolation had grown stronger. His father had moved away, and Elon lived with his mother, who was trying to make a life for herself after her divorce. It was during this period that Elon began to dive deep into books about science, engineering, and technology. He was consumed with a single idea: the future. He wanted to change the world, and he believed the key to doing so was in his mind and his ability to create. But through it all, something was missing. While Elon focused on building his future, his spiritual life remained in the background. There was no place for religion or faith in his world. It wasn't that he was hostile to the idea of God or the supernatural. It was simply that he didn't believe in things that couldn't be explained, couldn't be proven. He had no time for what he saw as intangibles. Logic and reason were his guiding stars. Yet, as he grew older, the questions began to creep in. During the sleepless nights spent working on his early ventures, Zip2, X.com, and later, SpaceX and Tesla, he often found himself contemplating the bigger questions. Why am I here? What is the point of all of this? What does success even mean if there's no deeper purpose behind it? It wasn't until later, after the success of PayPal, that Elon's work really began to take on a life of its own. SpaceX was founded with the goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species. Tesla was about changing the world's reliance on fossil fuels. Every venture was about solving global problems. But even with all of his success, a part of him felt like something was missing. He was driven, yes, but also restless. He didn't feel at peace with the weight of everything he had accomplished. Now, sitting in his office, Elon was faced with a new kind of question. It wasn't about building rockets or perfecting the electric car. It was about something much deeper, something he had long ignored. Did he believe in a higher power? Was there something beyond the vast universe of data and reason that could give meaning to his work? His mother had always encouraged him to think bigger, to imagine a world beyond the material. And yet, in all his years of striving, He had never truly stopped to think about the possibility that someone or something might be guiding him. The question, "Do you believe that God is watching over you?" had become an invitation to explore a side of himself he had long ignored. Elon's mind wandered to the times when things had seemed truly impossible. The early days of SpaceX were marked by failure after failure. The first 3 rockets had failed to reach orbit. Investors had pulled out. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Yet, against all odds, he had found the resolve to push forward. He could still remember the day he had told his team, after the 3rd failure, "We are going to make this work, no matter what." And then, against all expectations, the 4th rocket launch had succeeded. SpaceX had become a legitimate player in the space industry. But what had driven him to keep going? Was it pure willpower? Or was there something more? Some force beyond his understanding? He couldn't help but think about those early years and the pivotal moments in his life when everything seemed to be at stake. He had faced so many obstacles, and yet, each time, he had pushed through. But what if there was more to it? What if those moments weren't just the product of his brilliance and hard work, but the result of something bigger? Elon rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the thoughts. This wasn't like him. He was a man of science, of facts, of reason. But that woman's question, the one that still hung in the air, kept gnawing at him. He couldn't escape it. Was it possible that in all his success, he had been blind to the spiritual side of his life? To the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond what he could see and touch? For the first time in his life, Elon Musk was beginning to question the one thing he had always taken for granted: that everything could be explained through logic alone. The question had taken root in Elon's mind, like a seed buried deep in the soil. It wasn't something he could simply dismiss, nor could he ignore the faint stirrings of curiosity that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The world around him was moving at breakneck speed. SpaceX was preparing for its most ambitious mission yet, the launch of the Falcon Heavy, the most powerful rocket ever designed. Tesla was on the verge of mass production of the Model 3, a car that had the potential to revolutionize the auto industry. There were countless decisions to make, deadlines to meet, and people to manage. Yet, despite the whirlwind of activity, Elon found his mind drifting. The question that the elderly woman had asked him, so innocently, was now like a constant hum in the background of his life. "Do you believe that God is watching over you?" It seemed absurd to him at first. How could someone like Elon Musk, rational, driven, and always focused on the tangible, begin to entertain such abstract thoughts? But the more he tried to push it away, the more it seemed to creep back into his thoughts, tugging at him like a thread he couldn't pull free. At the same time, the pressure was mounting. SpaceX was facing a critical moment in its history. After the initial failures, the company had become a beacon of hope for the future of space exploration. But the stakes were even higher now. Elon had committed himself to making humanity a multiplanetary species, but to do so, he needed to perfect a technology that was still in its infancy. And then there was Tesla. Despite its success and the fervent following of electric car enthusiasts, the company was struggling with production delays and quality issues. The Model 3 was supposed to be the car that would push Tesla into the mainstream, but the reality of scaling production was proving to be more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Elon had to face the fact that his company was running dangerously low on cash. He had spent billions of his own money keeping the dream alive, and the pressure to make Tesla profitable was suffocating. The weight of the world was on his shoulders, and in the quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, Elon felt it. He felt it in the tightening of his chest, the dull ache in his head, the anxiety that gnawed at him late into the night. How could he keep everything going? How could he continue to drive these massive, world-changing companies forward when he was beginning to feel like he was running on fumes? He had always been driven by the desire to achieve the impossible, to prove everyone wrong, to make a dent in the universe. But now, it felt different. It wasn't just about the next great innovation or the next big breakthrough. It was about something more personal. It was about whether he was enough, whether his efforts would matter in the end. As he sat in his office one late evening, reviewing documents for SpaceX's next big mission, Elon's mind wandered again. He thought about the sacrifices he had made, The time lost with his children, the friendships that had withered, the physical toll his work had taken on his body. He had always believed that the end justified the means, that the great achievements would be worth the personal cost. But now, as the stress of his responsibilities piled up, he was beginning to question that belief. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO. She was the one person at SpaceX who could always be relied on to stay calm in the midst of chaos. "Elon," she said, walking in with a clipboard in hand, "we're facing a problem with the Falcon Heavy launch. There's a delay with the payload integration, and we might have to push the launch back another 2 weeks." Elon's stomach dropped. Another delay. Another setback. It felt like everything he worked for was slipping through his fingers. "Gwynne," he said, running a hand through his hair, "we can't afford another delay. We've already pushed back too many times. The world is watching. The investors are watching. If we don't get this right, SpaceX could be finished." She nodded, but there was a quiet understanding in her eyes. "I know, Elon. We're doing everything we can. But we can't cut corners. Not now. We need to get this right." He sighed deeply. The pressure was suffocating. SpaceX was teetering on the edge, and Tesla wasn't much better. Everything he had worked for, the dream of transforming space exploration and revolutionizing the automotive industry, was hanging by a thread. But that was just it, wasn't it? Every time it felt like everything was about to fall apart, he had always found a way to push through. His entire life had been built on overcoming the odds, on defying expectations. Failure was not an option. But now, with the weight of 2 multi-billion-dollar companies on his shoulders and a personal crisis of faith creeping in, failure felt more imminent than ever. Elon stared out the window at the sprawling view of the SpaceX headquarters. The launch pad loomed in the distance, silent and empty. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Musk, his mother. "I know you're stressed, but remember, you've always had something guiding you, even when you didn't realize it. Keep pushing, Elon. I'm proud of you." Elon stared at the message for a moment, his mother's words a brief moment of comfort in the storm of his life. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that someone, was watching over him. But the rational side of his mind pushed the thought aside. "I've got this," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. But deep down, he knew that the question from that woman at the press conference still hung in the air, unanswered. And it was no longer something he could simply ignore. The night was still, but the hum of Elon's thoughts kept him awake. He had just wrapped up another grueling day, managing the intricacies of both SpaceX and Tesla, when his mind began to wander again. The question from the elderly woman, so simple and direct, had begun to transform into a more complex puzzle, a puzzle that Elon Musk, the man who had solved countless problems of physics, engineering, and human potential, couldn't seem to solve. It wasn't about rockets or electric cars now. It wasn't about the next big breakthrough or how to improve the world's energy infrastructure. It was about something else entirely. Elon had always prided himself on thinking logically. In the world of high-risk ventures, there was no room for uncertainty or blind faith. You calculated, you assessed, you worked the numbers until you found the right solution. That was how he had built SpaceX from the ground up, how he had turned Tesla into a company that now stood on the edge of transforming the automotive world. But this was different. The thought had begun to infiltrate his mind more often now. Was there something greater at play here? Was there a guiding force in his life that he had simply been too blind to see? It wasn't just the woman's question that haunted him anymore. It was the deeper, unspoken question he had begun to ask himself. What if there is something more to life than what I can build with my hands? What if the work I do is not just a result of my own efforts, but of someone guiding me? But still, there was resistance. He had always relied on logic and reason. He had never needed religion or faith to push him forward, to drive him to accomplish the seemingly impossible. He was the guy who got to Mars, who made electric cars a reality, who pushed humanity's potential to places it had never been. What need did he have for God, for a higher power? Wasn't he proof enough that human ingenuity could transcend all limits? He shook his head as if to clear it. His mind was clouded. But despite his skepticism, a nagging curiosity persisted. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You've always had something guiding you, even when you didn't realize it. And now, for the first time, Elon was beginning to wonder, what if she was right? That weekend, Elon did something he had never done before. He decided to visit a place that might provide the answers he was searching for. He had heard about a spiritual retreat in the hills just outside of Los Angeles, a place that offered silence and meditation, a space for introspection. It was far from the fast-paced, high-stakes world of rocket science and electric cars. In fact, it felt almost like the opposite of everything he had ever known. Gwen had suggested the idea to him after a particularly stressful day in the office. You know, Elon, she had said, sometimes you just need to step back, clear your mind. Maybe it's time you tried something different. You've always been so focused on pushing forward, but maybe you need a moment to reflect. At first, Elon had dismissed the idea as absurd. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like something worth trying. He had nothing to lose. And so, the next Saturday, after a chaotic week of meetings and endless phone calls, Elon set off to the retreat. It was nestled in the quiet foothills, surrounded by trees and a stillness that felt almost unnatural compared to the usual hum of his life. When he arrived, he was greeted by a calm woman named Clara who seemed to know exactly why he was there. I can't promise you any answers, Mr. Musk, Clara said with a soft smile, but I can promise you space to breathe, space to think, space to find something that may or may not be there. Elon nodded silently. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but at least here, away from the constant pressure of deadlines and expectations, he might be able to clear his mind. He might be able to take that first step toward understanding the deeper, more existential questions that had begun to gnaw at him. The first day at the retreat was excruciating. The silence was suffocating. It felt like the world was pressing in on him from all sides, reminding him of the constant noise he had left behind. The calls, the meetings, the never-ending barrage of tasks. Sitting still in a room with nothing but his own thoughts felt like a challenge he wasn't prepared for. There were no phones, no laptops, no distractions of any kind. For the first time in years, Elon had no control over the pace of his life. His mind raced in circles as he tried to find something, anything, to grasp onto. Was there a point to all of this? Was there a purpose behind his achievements? Was it just about technology, progress, and success? Or was there something more? As the hours wore on, the constant restlessness in his chest began to soften. The silence, the stillness, started to become less suffocating. It was uncomfortable, yes, but there was something about it that began to feel right. By the end of the second day, Elon found himself walking through the woods surrounding the retreat. The trees towered above him, casting long shadows on the ground. The air was cool and fresh, a welcome contrast to the dry, high-pressure atmosphere of his daily life. As he walked, his thoughts seemed to slow, as if the rhythm of his steps was syncing with the rhythm of his mind. He wasn't thinking about rockets or electric cars. He wasn't thinking about his investors or his team. He wasn't thinking about any of the things that had consumed him for years. For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to simply be. He stopped near a large oak tree and sat down on a rock, looking up at the sky. The clouds were soft and white, floating lazily across the bright blue expanse. It struck him that in all his years of striving for the impossible, he had never taken a moment to simply look at the world around him, to appreciate the beauty and the mystery of it. And then, as if on cue, the question returned. Do you believe that God is watching over you? This time, however, the question didn't feel like a challenge. It didn't feel like a puzzle that needed solving. It felt like an invitation to explore something that had been absent from his life for far too long. He didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path, towards something greater, something beyond the material world. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to his life than what he could see or understand. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to just be still. The third day at the retreat arrived, and Elon was beginning to settle into the rhythm of solitude. Each day felt a little more comfortable than the last, though there was still a gnawing sense of restlessness deep within him. His mind kept turning over the same question, the same uncertainty, like a persistent whisper in the back of his thoughts. Do you believe that God is watching over you? The silence, which had initially felt suffocating, had begun to feel more like a refuge. He found that his mind, which had always been racing with thoughts of rockets, innovation, and the future, now had the space to wander in ways it never had before. It wasn't that he was finding answers, but that he was allowing himself to explore the possibility of not having all the answers. Elon was sitting outside, on a weathered bench overlooking a serene valley, when Clara came to join him. She was quiet, but there was a presence to her, a calm that seemed to emanate from her in a way that was impossible to ignore. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, as she took a seat beside him. Elon sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I'm looking for here, Clara. It's just a lot. A lot of pressure. A lot of questions." He turned to her, his voice dropping slightly. "I've spent my whole life working on things that are tangible, things I can measure and prove. But now, I'm not sure what I believe in anymore. I've been asking myself, is there something greater? Something beyond all of this?" Clara looked out over the valley, her gaze steady and thoughtful. Sometimes, it's not about having the answers. It's about the willingness to ask the questions. About allowing yourself to be open to the idea that there might be something more than what we can see and touch. Elon chuckled softly, though it was more out of habit than genuine amusement. "That's hard for me. I've spent my life building things. Machines. Systems. Making the impossible possible. And now, I'm here, asking questions about God. It's just strange." "It's not strange," Clara said, her voice gentle but firm. "In fact, it's the most human thing in the world. To ask big questions. To seek meaning. There's nothing wrong with that." Elon shifted in his seat, still uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'm not sure I even believe in God, or in anything beyond what I can see with my own eyes. The world, the universe, it's all just physics, right? Laws of nature. There's nothing mystical about it." "Maybe not," Clara agreed, nodding thoughtfully. "But even in the realm of physics, there are mysteries we still don't understand. We think we know how everything works, but the deeper we dig, the more we realize that there's always more to learn. Even science doesn't have all the answers." Elon sat quietly, mulling over her words. He had always believed that science and faith were separate, that they existed in different realms entirely. He didn't need faith. He had technology, logic, data. And yet, something about Clara's calm conviction felt right. It wasn't an answer, but it was a direction. "I've always been driven by this idea that we are meant to change the world," he said, almost to himself. "That by reaching for the stars, by creating a new future for humanity, we can overcome anything. But sometimes, I wonder if I've been missing something. Something deeper." Clara didn't respond immediately. She simply let the silence hang between them, giving Elon space to process his own thoughts. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice soft but piercing. "Perhaps what you're missing is the understanding that you don't have to do it all alone. That even in all your brilliance, there is something else guiding you. Something beyond your intellect. And maybe that's what the question is about. Not whether or not you believe in God, but whether you are willing to acknowledge that there's more to this life than just what you can control." The words hit him harder than he expected. It was as though something inside him shifted, a small but significant change in the way he was perceiving his life and his work. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on pushing through adversity with sheer willpower. But Clara's words planted a seed, a thought that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of the world by himself. Elon turned to look at her, something like vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "I've always been afraid of failure," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I've been so terrified of failing that I've pushed everyone away. I've isolated myself, thinking that if I just worked hard enough, I could make everything work. But sometimes, it feels like I'm running out of steam, like I'm pushing against something I can't see, something I don't understand." Clara smiled, her eyes kind and knowing. "And sometimes, the answer is simply to let go. To trust that things will unfold the way they are meant to." To trust that you are not alone in this journey, no matter how impossible it may seem. Elon sat back against the bench, his mind racing. Could it be true? Could there be someone else guiding him, helping him through the seemingly insurmountable challenges of his life? For the first time in years, Elon felt a flicker of hope. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A belief that maybe he wasn't alone in this after all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Elon remained silent. The question still lingered in his mind, but now, it didn't feel like an insurmountable challenge. It felt like an invitation to explore something deeper, something more meaningful than anything he had built with his own hands. Elon Musk had always been a man of action, someone who didn't linger on questions for too long. He was the kind of person who found solutions, who made decisions quickly, and who never hesitated when faced with a challenge. But as he sat there in the quiet of the retreat, watching the last light of the day fade behind the hills, he realized that this moment was different. This moment was not about fixing anything. It was not about making a decision or moving forward with the same relentless drive he had always embraced. It was about simply being. The stillness of the retreat had allowed Elon to step outside of his own head for the first time in years. He had spent so much of his life pursuing the future, the next big leap for humanity, that he had forgotten how to sit still and reflect. Now, as the evening settled around him, he began to understand something profound. There was a power in letting go of the need for control. He had always believed that everything in his life, from the creation of Tesla to the rockets of SpaceX, was a product of his own doing, of his relentless drive and sheer willpower. But over the past few days, the idea of something greater, something beyond his own understanding, had begun to take root. The thought that maybe he didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. The retreat was nearing its end, and Elon had learned more than he had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about finding a quick answer to the question the elderly woman had asked him. It wasn't about forcing himself to believe in something if he didn't feel it yet. It was about accepting the fact that the journey was ongoing, that questions were part of the process, not something to be avoided or solved in a single moment. It was about being open to the possibility that maybe there was a greater force, whether you called it God, the universe, or something else that was guiding him, even when he couldn't see it. Maybe he didn't need to understand everything. Maybe he just needed to trust. That night, after a final dinner with the other retreat attendees, Elon took a walk on his own. The stars were brighter than anything he'd ever seen, and the air was cool, crisp. As he walked, he let his thoughts drift. Maybe that was the key. Trust. Trust that everything he had built, the companies, the rockets, the cars, wasn't just about his genius or his work ethic. Perhaps all of it had been a product of something else, a deeper force that had guided him all along, pushing him forward when he felt like giving up, inspiring him when he felt lost. He couldn't be sure yet. He wasn't going to suddenly embrace religion or start preaching about faith, but he was beginning to see that faith didn't necessarily mean blind belief in something you couldn't see. It could mean having faith in the process, in the journey, in the fact that things might unfold the way they were meant to, even if he didn't always understand how or why. Elon stopped at a small clearing in the woods. He stood there for a moment, taking in the vastness of the night sky, the endless expanse of stars. He felt small in that moment, infinitesimal, really, but also strangely peaceful. For so long, he had seen the universe as something to conquer, something to master. Now, standing beneath the stars, he was beginning to see it as something to experience, something to be in awe of. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he didn't feel the overwhelming pressure to have all the answers right now. And that, in itself, was a revelation. The next morning, before he left the retreat, Clara came to say goodbye. "Do you feel different?" she asked, her voice warm, as if she already knew the answer. Elon looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm not sure, but I feel lighter. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. But for the first time in a long while, I'm okay with that." She nodded, as though she had been waiting for him to reach this conclusion. Sometimes, the journey is about more than the destination. And sometimes, the answers come when you least expect them. As he left the retreat and headed back to Los Angeles, Elon felt a sense of calm he had never experienced before. The world hadn't changed. The challenges with SpaceX and Tesla were still there. The pressure was still there. But something in him had shifted. It wasn't that the work he did had become any less important. It wasn't that the future of humanity and space exploration had suddenly seemed less urgent. But now, there was a new understanding. An understanding that, in the grand scheme of things, there was more to life than his work. There was more to life than his relentless drive to change the world. There was a balance he needed to find, a way to integrate the pursuit of progress with the peace that came from knowing he didn't have to do everything on his own. He was still Elon Musk, the same visionary, the same risk-taker. But now, he was beginning to understand that perhaps the true secret to success wasn't just about what you could build with your hands. It was about what you could build within yourself. As he boarded his private jet back to the bustling world of work and meetings, Elon reflected on the past few days. He hadn't expected to find peace or clarity during the retreat. He hadn't expected to find any answers at all, really. But what he had found was something far more valuable, a willingness to explore new questions and new perspectives. He didn't know if he believed in God yet, but he didn't need to have all the answers. He was okay with the mystery, with the journey, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of gratitude for the questions, for the uncertainty, for the space to reflect. He pulled out his phone and glanced at a text message from his mother, May Musk, that had come in during the flight. I'm so proud of you, Elon. I can see the change in you. Keep trusting the journey. You're never alone. He smiled softly, the weight in his chest lifting just a little more. For the first time, he truly believed her. Elon Musk returned to his life as the world's most ambitious innovator. The retreat had offered him peace, clarity, and a sense of quiet that he hadn't realized he'd been craving. But the world he had built, the world of rockets, electric cars, and high-stakes business, was waiting for him, just as complex and chaotic as it had been before. He hadn't expected the transition back to reality to be easy, and it wasn't. The moment he landed in Los Angeles, his phone buzzed nonstop with messages, reminders, and news updates. It was like diving back into an ocean of urgency, a whirlpool of expectations and pressures. There were meetings to attend, shareholders to address, and new decisions to be made. But as the world outside continued its usual frenetic pace, something inside Elon had changed. He sat in the back of his car as it sped toward his office, looking out the window at the sprawling city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the concrete jungle, and for a brief moment, Elon could almost feel the peace of the retreat again. It was a fleeting feeling, but it was there. He had tasted something new in his life, something quieter, something less frantic. And yet, he knew the real challenge had only just begun. How could he bring the lessons of the retreat back with him? How could he hold onto the sense of balance, of trust, when the demands of his world were always pulling him in 100 different directions? Elon was a man who thrived on solving complex problems, but this new internal struggle, wasn't so easily fixed. It wasn't about a formula or a strategy. It was about finding peace in the middle of chaos. As the car pulled into the Tesla campus, Elon's mind shifted gears. The factory, the engineers, the assembly lines, everything was ready for his attention. The future of sustainable energy and space exploration awaited. But now, for the first time, Elon was starting to think about the future in a different way. The next day, Elon found himself in a high-level meeting with the heads of Tesla's engineering division. They were discussing the next phase of the Model Y production and the timeline for launching new SpaceX missions to Mars. As usual, the room was filled with urgency, the air buzzing with the pressure to innovate, to move faster. But as Elon listened to the voices around him, something inside him stirred. For the first time, he felt a sense of detachment from the frenzy. The words that were being spoken seemed less important somehow, less urgent. He didn't feel the usual fire to push through the barriers, to make things happen at any cost. At a lull in the conversation, Elon spoke up, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what matters," he began, catching the attention of everyone in the room. "It's not that these projects don't matter. They do. The work we're doing here at Tesla and SpaceX, these things can change the world. But I've realized something over the past few days. I've been so focused on the future that I haven't always been present in the moment. I haven't been considering the bigger picture. The room fell silent. People exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond to the change in tone. Elon had always been the driving force behind these projects, the person who demanded faster, harder, better. Now, he was talking about slowing down, about thinking beyond the bottom line. I don't know if this makes sense to you, he continued, his voice thoughtful, but I'm beginning to understand that there's a balance that needs to be found between progress and peace, between striving for the future and being mindful of the present. I'm not asking us to stop working or to slow down for the sake of slowing down, but maybe we need to reassess our priorities. Maybe there's a different way we can achieve our goals without sacrificing everything along the way. Gwynne Shotwell, Tesla's president, who had worked closely with Elon for years, leaned forward. Are you saying that we need to rethink the way we operate? That the pace we've been pushing ourselves at might not be sustainable in the long run? Elon nodded slowly. I think so. We're on the verge of some incredible breakthroughs, and the world needs the innovation we're pushing forward. But it's not just about getting to Mars or making the next electric car. It's about how we get there. It's about the kind of people we want to be when we reach those milestones. There was an uncomfortable pause in the room. Elon could sense the skepticism in the air. Tesla, SpaceX, and all of his companies were built on the principle of pushing beyond the limits, of working harder, faster, and smarter than anyone else. And now, here he was, suggesting that maybe the process, maybe he needed to slow down. But as he sat there, surrounded by the people who had helped him build everything he had, he realized that this moment, this conversation, was one of the most important decisions of his life. It wasn't about reinventing his companies. It was about reinventing himself. The days following that meeting were filled with tension and uncertainty. Elon's team was used to his drive, his relentless push toward success. They were used to the all-nighters, the high-stakes risks, the near-constant push for progress. But now, as Elon tried to integrate the lessons of the retreat into his work, he could sense the resistance. People weren't sure what to make of this new side of their leader. For the first time, Elon felt like he had to redefine what success meant, not just for his companies, but for himself. He began to spend more time with his team, having longer conversations about purpose and impact. He started asking questions he had never asked before. Why do we do what we do? What are we really building here? It wasn't about the bottom line, the next round of funding, or the latest tech innovation. It was about the why. As the days passed, Elon's reflections began to shape the direction of his work. It wasn't that he was abandoning his ambitions. Far from it. He still wanted to make life multiplanetary. He still believed in the future of sustainable energy. But now, he wanted to build those things in a way that aligned with his new understanding, that success was about more than achieving goals. It was about how you got there and who you became in the process. He started calling more meetings with his leadership teams, not just about profits and deadlines, but about the bigger picture. What did they want their legacy to be? What kind of impact did they want to leave on the world? It was a new kind of vision, one that was still rooted in progress and ambition, but also in mindfulness, balance, and sustainability, on a personal level as much as a corporate one. As Elon navigated this shift in his own approach to work, he found that he wasn't alone in this journey. His team began to respond, slowly but surely. There was a growing understanding that success wasn't just about the hard numbers. It was about creating a culture that supported not only innovation but also well-being. Elon had always been a trailblazer, a pioneer who pushed the limits of what was possible. But now, he was beginning to understand that being a leader also meant showing others the way to a more balanced, more sustainable future. This didn't just apply to his work. It applied to his personal life as well. When he spoke to his mother about the changes in his approach, she smiled, her voice soft but filled with wisdom. I'm proud of you, Elon. You've always been a dreamer. But now, you're learning how to be present in the dream. That's the real challenge. For the first time in years, Elon Musk truly felt like he was beginning to understand what his mother had always known. The balance between progress and peace, between striving and surrender, was not an easy one. But it was, perhaps, the most important journey of all. Elon Musk's transformation was not immediate. Old habits die hard, especially when you've built entire empires on the principles of relentless pursuit and nonstop innovation. Yet, despite the resistance that lingered, both within himself and his companies, there was a quiet shift. Slowly but surely, Elon began to adjust his focus. The world around him, however, was unforgiving in its expectations. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company all demanded constant attention. Deadlines, shareholder meetings, and innovation milestones stacked up quickly, and Elon's time was increasingly fragmented. Yet, for the first time, he was consciously making an effort to keep one foot grounded in the present. There were moments, in the early mornings or late nights, when his mind would drift back to the retreat, to the stillness of the mountains. He could almost feel the serenity of the quiet space where he had once pondered the bigger questions of life. But those moments were fleeting. It was easy to slip back into the chaos, to give in to the never-ending cycle of work. Still, he held on to the lessons he'd learned, to make time for the stillness, to reflect, and to embrace the process without being solely consumed by the result. It wasn't about abandoning his drive to push humanity forward. It was about pushing forward in a way that allowed for personal growth, balance, and, ultimately, fulfillment. He realized that change, both personal and professional, wasn't going to happen overnight. But if he was committed to this path, the journey itself would be the real reward. A few weeks after returning from the retreat, Elon was faced with one of the most difficult decisions of his career. Tesla's latest quarterly earnings report was due, and there was an immense amount of pressure to deliver results. The electric vehicle market was growing at an exponential rate, but so were the challenges. Competition was increasing, raw material costs were rising, and the company was heavily reliant on its next generation of vehicles, including the Cybertruck, to maintain its competitive edge. The board was breathing down his neck. Shareholders were anxious. Every decision, every move he made felt like it carried the weight of the world. And as the deadlines loomed closer, the old feeling began to return. The familiar pressure, the tension in his chest, the need to push harder, faster, further. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Elon sat in his office, staring at the projected numbers on his screen. There was a part of him that felt the pull to throw himself back into the work, to bury himself in spreadsheets, strategies, and sales projections. It was the easy choice, the instinctive choice. But there was another part of him, the part that had begun to understand something deeper, that resisted. He was tired in a way he hadn't been before. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of a man who had spent years chasing a future that, in some ways, had started to feel hollow. The relentless pursuit of a goal that never seemed to end had left him questioning the purpose behind it all. In that moment, he asked himself the question he had never truly allowed himself to ask before. What is the point of all this? He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The pressure from the outside world was intense. But there was a deeper pressure inside him. The pressure to make it mean something, to ensure that his life's work had a lasting impact, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of its impact on the world and on his own soul. The phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "Are you okay, Elon? You seem distant lately. Remember, you're not alone." Her words echoed in his mind, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to truly hear them. He wasn't alone. Not really. That night, Elon found himself walking around his massive Los Angeles home. The mansion was silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the city below. He walked out onto the balcony and looked out over the lights of the city. The vastness of it all overwhelmed him. The millions of people living their lives, each with their own struggles, triumphs, and ambitions. And yet, here he was, standing at the top of it all, feeling unsure about the very thing that had gotten him here. The unrelenting drive for success. The thirst for more. For bigger, better, faster. He thought about the retreat again, about the elderly woman who had asked him, "Do you believe that God is watching over you?" It wasn't a question he had answered then, but maybe now he could start answering it, not with words, but with his actions. He stepped back inside and grabbed his phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in weeks. "Hi, Gwen. Elon said when she picked up. Can you come to my office tomorrow? I need to talk. Gwynne Shotwell, Tesla's president, walked into Elon's office the next day, looking slightly concerned. She knew Elon well enough to understand when something was weighing on him. As she sat across from him, she waited for him to speak. Elon took a deep breath, his fingers tapping on the edge of his desk. I've been thinking about the way we've been running things here. About how I've been running things. Gwynne raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I've been pushing for more. More production, more innovation, more sales. I've been so focused on getting to the next milestone that I haven't taken a step back to think about the bigger picture. I've been obsessed with the future. And it's not that I don't want to keep pushing forward, but I'm starting to wonder if there's a way to do this differently, to push forward without sacrificing everything along the way. Gwynne's expression softened. I've seen the change in you. It's been noticeable. But I've also seen you struggle with balancing the mission and your personal life. It's like you're trying to do everything at once. And sometimes, you can't. Elon nodded. I know. I think I've been trying to build a future that's not just about technology. It's about people. About creating something that matters, not just for the sake of innovation, but for the sake of the people we're trying to help. Maybe I've been too focused on making a big impact and forgot to think about how that impact affects everything else. Us, our team, the world. There was a long pause, and then Gwynne said, So what's the next step? Elon smiled slightly. I'm not sure yet, but I know I can't keep running at full speed without considering the cost. I need to think about the future, yes, but I also need to think about how we live in the present. The two aren't separate. They're interconnected. It's time to find a new balance. As the conversation ended, Elon felt lighter, somehow. The weight of the decision still loomed, but he knew that he was beginning to find a path forward, a path that integrated both his relentless drive for progress and a new understanding of what it meant to truly live. He wasn't going to abandon the vision that had shaped his life, but now, he was beginning to see that the vision had to evolve. He couldn't just focus on building a sustainable future for humanity in space or on Earth. He also needed to focus on creating a sustainable life for himself, for his teams, and for those who would inherit the work he was building. For the first time, Elon Musk began to understand that the future wasn't just about technology. It was about balance. It was about finding the space to grow, to reflect, and to live. And as he looked out at the vast horizon before him, he felt a quiet sense of hope. The future might be uncertain, but it was no longer a race. It was a journey, and he was ready to take the next step. Elon Musk's life had always been defined by a singular purpose: to change the world. Whether through electric cars, rockets to Mars, or innovations in AI and tunneling technology, the driving force had been clear. He was working toward a future that would be better for humanity, and he was willing to sacrifice nearly anything to get there. But after his recent reflections, something had started to shift within him. The idea that success meant achieving a particular end, building rockets, solving the climate crisis, or creating the future of transportation, no longer seemed as simple as it once had. He had begun to understand that success wasn't just about what you built, but how you built it. Elon had been running at full speed for so long that he had forgotten to ask himself one essential question. What do I want my legacy to truly be? The next day, Elon called for a company-wide meeting with the leadership teams at Tesla and SpaceX. He wanted to address the ongoing changes he was experiencing, and he knew it was time to let his team in on what had been unfolding in his mind. The room was filled with familiar faces: engineers, innovators, business leaders, each one a vital part of the machine that had propelled him to the top. They all knew the drill. Relentless work, no shortcuts, no hesitation. But as they sat down, the usual tension in the room felt different, almost palpable. They could tell something had changed. Elon stepped up to the podium, his hands resting on the edge of it as he looked out over his team. He could sense their curiosity, their uncertainty. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Elon started, his voice calm but firm, and I think it's time to have an honest conversation with all of you about where we're going and what we're really trying to build here, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of the kind of company we want to be. He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. The energy in the room shifted as his team hung on every word. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on what success really means, not just in terms of reaching Mars or selling electric vehicles, but in how we get there, Elon continued. For years, I've been obsessed with pushing harder, faster, more. But I think the most important part of our work isn't just in what we accomplish, it's in how we do it, who we are when we do it, and what impact it has on the world beyond our companies. There was a quiet murmur in the room. People exchanged glances. This wasn't the Elon they were used to, the one who always drove them forward with intensity, with demands for more. I've come to realize, Elon went on, that success is not just about the destination. It's about the journey, about the people we become along the way. It's about doing the right thing, not just the most ambitious thing. We're here not just to make history, but to shape it in a way that makes the future better, not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us. The change in Elon's approach was subtle at first, but it was significant. Over the next few weeks, he began to implement small but meaningful changes within his companies. At Tesla, for example, he encouraged his team to consider the long-term impacts of their products, not just in terms of profitability, but in terms of environmental sustainability, human welfare, and social responsibility. He made it a point to emphasize the importance of work-life balance and personal well-being among his employees. While he still expected excellence, he now understood that pushing people too hard, too fast, could lead to burnout, resentment, and a loss of the very passion that had driven their successes in the first place. At SpaceX, Elon encouraged his engineers to think beyond just getting to Mars and making interplanetary life possible. He wanted them to consider the ethical implications of space travel, the environmental costs, and how they could ensure that humanity's expansion into space was done responsibly and sustainably. But perhaps the most profound change was the way Elon started to lead. Instead of being the lone visionary pushing his team to the limit, he became more collaborative. He spent more time listening, more time discussing ideas with his team, more time reflecting on the path forward before acting. The transformation in Elon was not just professional, it was personal. He spent more time with his children, deepening his relationship with them. He reconnected with his friends and family, acknowledging that the isolation of his previous life had caused rifts he couldn't afford to ignore anymore. As the weeks went by, he started to experience what he could only describe as peace. It wasn't the absence of challenges or the cessation of his ambition. It was a quiet understanding that he could pursue his dreams without sacrificing everything else. He could be present in his own life, even as he worked toward changing the world. The next time Elon spoke with his mother, she could hear it in his voice. "I think I'm starting to understand, Mom," he said. "The world isn't just about what we create. It's about how we live while we're creating it, and how we affect the world around us as we do. I've spent so much time looking to the future that I've forgotten to live in the present." His mother laughed softly. "You've always had a tendency to burn the candle at both ends, Elon. But I'm proud of you. It sounds like you're finally figuring out the real purpose of everything you've been working toward." Elon smiled to himself. He had always been proud of his relentless drive, but for the first time, he was beginning to realize that true success was about balance, about understanding that the present mattered as much as the future. He wasn't just building a future for humanity. He was building a future for himself, a life that included his family, his health, his passions, and his peace. And as he looked ahead, he saw a path forward, one that wasn't just about conquering the stars or revolutionizing industries. It was about leading with purpose, with integrity, and with a vision that took into account not just the technological advancements of tomorrow, but the human experiences of today. Changes at Tesla and SpaceX weren't immediately visible to the public. The world didn't see the transformation within the walls of these companies right away. But inside, the shift was profound. The once unstoppable pace began to slow down in a meaningful way. Teams became more empowered to make decisions, to experiment, to explore new ideas without the pressure of a never-ending race against time. Elon's team saw him as a leader who was more engaged with them as people, not just employees, but partners in a mission to build something greater. The pressure to be constantly on edge, to work through the night in pursuit of the next milestone, began to lessen. Innovation didn't have to come at the cost of mental health or personal sacrifice. For Elon, The ripple effect was felt most deeply in his personal life. With more time to reflect, to spend with his children, and to nurture his relationships, he realized that his success wasn't just about achieving grand goals. It was about being able to enjoy the journey, to experience the world as it was, and to find joy in the everyday moments he had once taken for granted. He was learning to embrace the imperfections of life, understanding that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but that those challenges didn't need to come at the expense of his happiness, his health, or his sense of peace. The future was still a grand ambition, but it was one he now intended to walk toward with more balance and intention. And as the years went by, those who had watched Elon grow from a driven, single-minded entrepreneur to a more reflective, purposeful leader saw the change not as a retreat from ambition, but as a new way of pursuing it. A way that honored the complexity of life, the humanity behind the technology, and the quiet moments in between the milestones. As Elon Musk continued to embrace a new philosophy of balance, the looming question of his legacy remained. The concept of legacy had always been important to him, but it had always been associated with grand technological feats, sending humanity to Mars, revolutionizing the electric car industry, or making AI a part of daily life. The tangible, disruptive innovations had always been the focus, shaping the future in the most visible, dramatic way possible. But now, as he spent more time reflecting on what he truly wanted his legacy to be, the answers were no longer so clear-cut. In his quiet moments, he found himself asking, what happens when we reach the summit? What does the journey mean if we're too focused on climbing, too obsessed with conquering the next challenge? The weight of this question wasn't easy to carry. It wasn't just about being remembered for his technological achievements. It was about what those achievements meant in the grander scheme of life. Was he shaping a future where humanity thrived in all aspects, not just technologically, but emotionally, spiritually, and ethically? Or had his obsession with innovation and success come at a deeper, more personal cost? It was time to revisit his relationship with his board of directors. Elon had always maintained a close connection with the executives at Tesla and SpaceX, but the tone of his leadership had shifted in ways that required them to adjust their expectations as well. Sitting around a large table in the Tesla boardroom, Elon addressed the group, his mind filled with both certainty and trepidation. "We've achieved a lot together," he began, his voice steady but thoughtful. "Tesla, SpaceX, these companies are reshaping the future of humanity. We've changed the way people think about electric vehicles, space exploration, and energy. But I want to talk about the next phase. Not just for the companies, but for all of us." A quiet hum filled the room as the board members exchanged glances, intrigued by Elon's tone. It wasn't the usual sharp, energetic delivery they were accustomed to hearing. There was a weight behind his words now, an invitation to dig deeper, to think beyond the conventional business metrics that had always driven the conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what our legacy should really be," Elon continued. "The future of humanity is important, but it's not just about technology. It's about how we create a world where people, our employees, our customers, our children, are not just surviving, but thriving. We have to consider more than just financial performance and technological milestones. We need to think about the impact we have on society, on the environment, on the individual." The board members were silent for a moment, processing his words. Many of them had known Elon as a visionary who cared little for compromise. They respected his relentless pursuit of progress, even when it seemed impossible. But this new approach, was something different. They could see the vulnerability in him, the realization that his ambitions could no longer be the sole driving force. Elon took a deep breath. "I'm not suggesting we abandon our mission. I'm suggesting we expand it. It's no longer just about being the first to reach Mars, or having the most powerful electric vehicle. It's about ensuring that what we build doesn't just serve the future of humanity, but enhances the lives of those in the present." The meeting continued for hours, the conversation growing deeper and more introspective as Elon articulated his vision for the future. The board responded cautiously at first, unsure how to respond to such a radical shift in his thinking. But over time, a new understanding began to emerge. "What if we created a new standard?" one board member asked. "Not just for the technologies we develop, but for the way we lead as a company. We could push for environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and worker well-being as key pillars of our mission. We could build a model that others would follow, not just for the sake of profit, but for the betterment of society. Elon's eyes lit up at the suggestion. It was the very kind of collaboration he had hoped for, the kind that went beyond pure technological disruption and embraced the broader responsibilities that came with being at the helm of such influential companies. That's exactly it, he said. We need to lead by example. We need to show that it's possible to make groundbreaking innovations and make a positive impact on the world. We can show that you don't have to sacrifice people or the planet to create something extraordinary. The conversation slowly shifted from abstract ideals to concrete ideas. How could Tesla further integrate sustainability in its supply chain? Could SpaceX incorporate ethical considerations into its space programs, addressing the potential risks of space debris, the preservation of celestial bodies, or the ethical treatment of space workers? By the end of the meeting, there was a palpable sense of alignment. Elon had laid out a new direction, one that balanced ambition with responsibility, technology with humanity. But the real challenge would be in executing this vision. It wasn't enough to change the rhetoric. They would have to change their operations, their mindset, and their goals to align with this new understanding of success. But, for the first time in a long time, Elon felt a quiet sense of hope about what lay ahead. Despite the optimism in the boardroom, doubts still lingered in Elon's mind. He had seen firsthand the way the world responded to major disruptions. Tesla had been relentlessly scrutinized by the press and the financial world. SpaceX had faced countless setbacks, many of them in public view. No matter how many obstacles they overcame, the bar would always be higher, the expectations greater. And now, as he considered the weight of his new vision, one that demanded ethical innovation alongside technological progress, he couldn't help but wonder whether he was asking too much. Could a company like Tesla, which was designed to disrupt and innovate at breakneck speed, really slow down enough to focus on the human side of progress? Could SpaceX, a company built to reach the stars, ground itself in a vision that prioritized the people on Earth? Elon spent the night alone in his office, pondering these questions. For all of his innovations, for all of the dreams he had brought to life, there was still the burden of leadership, the weight of the decisions he had to make. Every action, every change, would ripple out into the world in ways he could neither fully anticipate nor control. But one thing was clear. This new journey wasn't just about reaching Mars or selling electric cars. It was about ensuring that whatever he built, whatever legacy he left, would be one that valued not only technological achievement but the humanity that lay behind it. The following weeks saw the beginnings of a more holistic approach at Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla's mission, once narrowly defined as accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy, now included a greater focus on employee well-being, community engagement, and social responsibility. SpaceX, in turn, began to explore how their missions to Mars could involve global collaboration and ethical decision-making, how their success could lift humanity as a whole, not just a select few. Elon was still the same visionary who had once dreamed of electric cars and reusable rockets. But now, he was becoming a leader who understood that his impact would be measured not just by the products his companies delivered, but by the world they left behind. He hadn't yet found all the answers. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty. But as he looked at the new paths unfolding before him, paths that balanced ambition with integrity, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. And for the first time, he felt that his legacy wouldn't just be defined by what he created, but by the kind of person he had become along the way. After the board meeting and the subsequent changes at Tesla and SpaceX, Elon found himself at a crossroads. For years, he had been singularly focused on one goal after another, checking off boxes of world-changing achievements: electric cars, reusable rockets, and ambitious missions to Mars. But now, with his new philosophy of balance and ethical innovation, he realized that he had to make a deeper commitment to the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. It was no longer just about revolutionizing industries. It was about transforming the very nature of how industries operated and how they impacted the people and the planet. Elon began to spend more time with his children, taking them on weekend trips to remote areas, far away from the pressures of Silicon Valley. He had always been an involved father, but his earlier years had been marked by an intensity of focus on work that often meant sacrificing personal moments. Now, there was a new awareness in him. He understood that the sacrifices he had made to push his companies forward also meant missing out on key moments with the people who mattered most. The time spent with his children, teaching them to fish by a quiet river, taking long drives through the countryside, or watching sunsets from a remote cabin, grounded him in a way that nothing else had. It wasn't just about spending more time with them. It was about reconnecting with what it meant to be human, to be present, to remember that the world was filled with beauty and joy outside of work. Elon also began meditating more frequently, a practice he had once dismissed as something only for those seeking escape from their problems. He learned, through meditation, how to be still, how to quiet his mind and listen to his inner voice. The habit of constant innovation had led him to push his own thoughts aside, but now he could hear them more clearly. It was during these quiet moments that he realized he had been chasing something bigger than himself, but the pursuit of greatness had often come at the expense of deeper understanding. Back at Tesla and SpaceX, the shift in leadership wasn't just felt internally, it began to draw the attention of new potential partners. Elon's commitment to a more responsible and balanced future attracted a new breed of investor, one that cared not just about profits but about the social and environmental impact of their investments. One afternoon, Elon met with a group of philanthropists and environmental activists who had recently shown interest in Tesla and SpaceX's sustainability initiatives. This was a new type of meeting for him, one that focused less on financial forecasts and more on the potential to shape the world for the better. Elon, ever the realist, knew that to maintain the integrity of his vision, these new partners would need to align with the core values of the companies. The meeting was held in the Tesla headquarters, and the mood was one of cautious optimism. There was a deep level of respect for Elon and what he had achieved, but there was also skepticism. Could Tesla and SpaceX really live up to their promises of sustainability, ethical technology, and social responsibility? "We've built products that revolutionize industries," Elon said to the group. "Now, I want to make sure we're not just changing the world. We're making it a better place for everyone, starting with the people we work with and the communities we serve." One philanthropist, a quiet woman in her 50s named Clara, spoke up. "That's admirable, Elon, but the world is skeptical. There's a lot of distrust when it comes to big corporations, especially tech companies. What are you doing to prove that your actions match your words?" Elon paused. He had heard these questions before. In the past, he would have deflected, giving a quick answer or a vision of a future that would eventually justify all the struggles. But this time, he took a moment, allowing the weight of the question to sit with him. "I understand the skepticism," he said finally. "It's justified. But actions speak louder than words, and we're taking steps every day to show that our work isn't just about technological innovation. It's about doing things the right way. We're building products that make the world cleaner, greener, and more sustainable. But beyond that, we're creating a company culture that prioritizes the well-being of our people. We're rethinking how we operate, how we lead, and how we impact the world." Clara nodded slowly, considering his words. "And how do you measure this? What metrics do you have to track your success, not just in dollars and cents, but in people and the environment?" Elon had anticipated this question and smiled. He had already been working with his leadership team to develop new metrics, ones that took into account employee satisfaction, carbon footprints, ethical sourcing, and even the long-term health of the communities affected by their products. "We're rolling out a new set of reporting tools in the next quarter," he explained. "Ones that not only track traditional performance, but also give us transparency into how we're improving people's lives, how we're reducing our environmental footprint, and how we're fostering a culture of integrity. This isn't just about being green. It's about being responsible and transparent." The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. There was still a lot of work to be done, but this conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where Tesla and SpaceX wouldn't just be judged by the impact of their products, but by the ethical standards they set as global corporations. It wasn't just about changing Earth anymore. Elon's ambition to make life multiplanetary still burned fiercely inside him, but it had evolved. The question was no longer just how do we colonize Mars? The question was now how do we ensure that humanity's expansion into space is done ethically, responsibly, and in a way that respects both the universe and the people on Earth. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon sat alone in his office, staring out the window at the stars. Space had always been his greatest ambition, but now it felt different. The idea of exploring other worlds was no longer just a scientific challenge, it was a moral and philosophical one. Could humanity really be trusted to reach the stars without repeating the mistakes it had made on Earth? Could we find ways to expand into space that didn't perpetuate the inequalities, the exploitation, and the environmental degradation that had characterized life on Earth for so long? He began discussing the idea with his SpaceX leadership team. What if they could create an interplanetary code of ethics? A framework that not only guided their space missions, but also set a precedent for future generations of spacefaring civilizations. What if they could create a new kind of space economy? One based not on resources, but on cooperation, sustainability, and the protection of the cosmos itself. We need to think about this as a shared responsibility, Elon said during one of the team meetings. The future of humanity in space is not just about technology. It's about ensuring that we don't repeat the mistakes of our past. We need to set a new precedent. We're not just going to Mars to build a colony. We're going to build a future that's ethical, sustainable, and respectful of life itself. The team was energized by the idea. They had always thought of SpaceX's mission as one of exploration and discovery, but now it was becoming something even more profound. A mission of hope, of responsibility, and of a future that could truly be a new beginning for humanity. As the months passed, Elon felt a new sense of peace, one that had eluded him for years. His life was still chaotic, still full of challenges, but the clarity he had gained about what mattered most was helping him navigate it all. In his personal life, he found a balance between the quiet moments with his children and the fast-paced, world-changing work he did. At Tesla and SpaceX, his vision was beginning to take shape in meaningful ways. Lessons learned from his introspection were influencing the way his companies operated, and he began to see results in the way employees, customers, and even investors responded. Perhaps most importantly, though, he began to understand that his legacy wasn't something he had to force. It wasn't about creating something so massive that it left a permanent mark on the world. It was about creating something that would endure through the lives of those it touched, through the people who believed in it, and through the positive ripple effect it had on society. In the end, the road less traveled, one of reflection, responsibility, and ethical progress, was the road that led him to peace. As the year progressed, Elon found himself grappling with the dual forces that had always shaped his existence. His insatiable desire for technological breakthroughs and the growing responsibility to ensure those breakthroughs were used for the greater good. For so long, his work had been about the pursuit of innovation for its own sake. The electric cars, the rockets, the solar power solutions. Now, however, the stakes felt different. The technology that once seemed like a far-off dream was here. And with that arrival came an ever-increasing awareness of the ethical questions and societal impacts those technologies raised. But perhaps more pressing than the ethical debates was the quiet fear that crept into his thoughts at night. Was it too late? Had the world already become too fractured, too divided, to truly change the course of humanity's future? Elon's realization that progress wasn't just about scaling new heights. It was about healing old wounds, led him to a series of bold decisions. He had spent much of his life trying to break the mold, to redefine the way the world worked. But now, the question was, could he break the mold in a way that also fixed what was broken? One of the most significant initiatives he began to explore was the creation of a new kind of urban development, one that would seamlessly integrate sustainable technologies, promote social well-being, and foster a sense of community. It was an idea that had been percolating in his mind for years, but now, with the combination of his resources, his company's capabilities, and his newfound sense of purpose, it felt like the right time to bring it to life. The concept was simple, but revolutionary. A city built from the ground up with sustainability and equality at its core. The project, which he tentatively named the New Dawn Initiative, would aim to create urban spaces where people lived and worked in harmony with the environment, utilizing solar, electric, and smart technologies to promote both individual and collective well-being. Tesla would provide the energy infrastructure, while SpaceX could contribute in ways he had never imagined. For example, Mars and Earth could share technology that promoted the use of in-situ resources. SpaceX's Mars habitats could be a model for Earthbound communities, drawing on the lessons learned from building sustainable off-world environments. To begin, Elon took the bold step of collaborating with local governments and urban planners, a move that required navigating the bureaucratic landscape in ways he hadn't been used to. For someone who had often resisted governmental oversight, the idea of working within a political framework was a humbling shift, but the scale of what he envisioned demanded it. He knew that in order to bring this vision to life, it couldn't just be a Tesla or SpaceX project. It needed to be a cooperative effort. He sought out individuals from all fields: architects, city planners, environmental activists, social justice advocates, and, of course, the people who would live in these new spaces. In true Musk fashion, he aimed for the most ambitious, high-tech solutions while keeping an ear to the ground on the realities that people faced every day. The first step was to create a model city. It would be small, a proof of concept, a microcosm that could scale, but one that would demonstrate how sustainable and socially responsible urban living could thrive. The new Dawn City would have renewable energy, green building designs, self-sustaining agricultural systems, and accessible healthcare. Public transportation would be clean and electric, connected by autonomous vehicles that would minimize congestion and emissions. Education and community engagement would be central to the planning, ensuring that residents weren't just living in a city, they were shaping it, too. However, as ambitious as Elon's vision was, not everyone shared his enthusiasm. Within months of announcing the idea, critics began to surface, some from the environmental community, others from political and economic sectors. Elon Musk wants to build a utopia, but you can't just start from scratch and hope that everything will be perfect, one environmental expert argued during a televised interview. Cities are complex, and building new ones from the ground up has unforeseen consequences. There's a reason why our current urban systems are the way they are, and they're not all bad. Elon watched the interview with a mixture of frustration and understanding. He knew that he was challenging the status quo, and that was always going to bring resistance. But this time, it wasn't just about proving that he could succeed. It was about convincing people that he wasn't trying to escape reality. He was trying to build a better one. For days, he didn't respond to the media. Instead, he focused on refining the project, ensuring that it addressed the very concerns that critics were raising. He consulted with urban planners, environmentalists, and ethicists to better understand the complexities of such an ambitious project. After a week of intense deliberation, Elon responded with a statement that would mark a turning point for the project. This isn't about creating a utopia. It's about building something that's better than what we have now. We're not here to replace existing cities. We're here to create a living experiment, one that can serve as a model for the cities of tomorrow. We are learning as we go, and we want to engage with every voice, especially those who have concerns. We're not pretending that this will be easy, but we believe it's worth trying. Despite the criticisms, there were others who saw the potential in the New Dawn initiative. Entrepreneurs, environmental advocates, and tech innovators began reaching out to support the project. Even local governments, initially skeptical, were beginning to see the possibilities. Elon's leadership in the space industry, his ability to build infrastructure on Mars, to launch reusable rockets, to create something out of nothing, was now being seen in a new light. This wasn't just about Mars. It was about creating a world where sustainable living wasn't just possible, it was essential. Elon had become not just a disruptor of industries, but a beacon for a new way of thinking about how humanity could live. It wasn't about grandiose statements or flashy technology. It was about offering real solutions for real problems. It was about building cities where technology wasn't just a tool for efficiency, but a vehicle for equality, sustainability, and collective well-being. One of the most surprising developments was the alliance Elon formed with an old rival. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and the man behind Blue Origin, reached out to Elon after the announcement of the New Dawn initiative. "Let's do something together," Bezos said, his tone both businesslike and surprisingly warm. "We've been competitors in space, but maybe we can combine our resources to tackle Earth's challenges." Elon hesitated. There was a history of rivalry between them, especially in the space industry. But in that moment, he realized that this wasn't about personal egos. It was about something far greater. He agreed to meet. The two met in a conference room in Tesla's headquarters, the walls lined with models of rockets and electric cars. Bezos laid out his vision, a joint venture to create an off-world resource hub that could alleviate the strain on Earth's resources. "We're not just talking about space exploration anymore," Bezos said. "We're talking about sustainability and resource management on a planetary scale. I think we can combine what we're both doing and create something truly transformative." Elon was intrigued. This wasn't just about mining asteroids or colonizing planets. It was about finding ways to use technology, whether from space or Earth, to benefit the environment, people, and the future of the planet. It was an unexpected partnership, but in many ways, it seemed like the right one. Together, they could take the best ideas from each of their ventures and form a new vision for humanity's future, one that not only embraced technological advancement but used that advancement to heal the planet. As the New Dawn project took shape, Elon realized that his true vision for the future was no longer just about reaching the stars. It was about creating a world on Earth that was sustainable, ethical, and equitable, a world that could serve as a model for a new kind of society. The next step wasn't about making grand gestures or scaling up the biggest projects. It was about listening to critics, listening to people, and listening to the planet itself. There would always be obstacles, but with a clearer sense of purpose and the right allies by his side, Elon felt a renewed sense of optimism. This was no longer about a singular vision for the future. It was about the collective future of humanity and ensuring that the world we built, both on Earth and beyond, would be one we could be proud of. As the months passed and the New Dawn initiative began to gain traction, Elon's thoughts turned inward. He had always prided himself on his ability to dream big, to push the limits of what was possible. But now, as the world watched closely, the burden of his legacy grew heavier. Every decision he made seemed to carry the weight of history, of billions of people whose lives could be shaped by the changes he was advocating for. For someone who had always thrived on the thrill of disruption, the responsibility of creating something lasting was a new and unfamiliar challenge. He began to question himself in ways he never had before. Was I doing enough? Was this the right path? And then, there were the doubts that crept in at night. Would it all be worth it? Would the world embrace the changes I'm trying to create? Or would I be remembered as just another well-meaning innovator who failed to make a real difference? While the New Dawn initiative gained momentum, the partnerships Elon had forged began to evolve in unexpected ways. His collaboration with Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, initially born out of necessity, became something more. A merging of two visions that, despite their rivalry, had far more in common than either man had initially realized. Together, they held meetings with some of the world's largest governments, environmental organizations, and business leaders. They explored the idea of creating a global consortium, a coalition of like-minded companies and individuals who shared their commitment to sustainability and responsible technology. The idea was simple. If they could align the world's most powerful companies, governments, and industries, they could push forward a global initiative that didn't just focus on technological advancement, but ensured that progress would be shared equitably. But despite the optimism surrounding these partnerships, Elon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the world wasn't ready. In many ways, the economic and political systems in place were at odds with the kind of change they were trying to create. Capitalism, as it had existed for centuries, often rewarded short-term gains and ignored the long-term consequences of those gains. Corporations and governments moved slowly, bogged down by bureaucracy and vested interests. Elon knew that to succeed, he would need to change not just the technological landscape but the political and economic one as well. And that meant taking risks, big ones. One evening, as he sat in his office at Tesla, looking over some of the latest reports from his various ventures, Elon had an epiphany. He couldn't just disrupt industries. He needed to disrupt the very systems that govern those industries. The problem wasn't just technology. It was how that technology was governed and regulated. With this in mind, Elon began to craft a bold proposal, a new global governance framework built on the principles of transparency, responsibility, and collaboration. He called it the Global Coalition for Technological and Environmental Progress. The idea was to create an international body, not just a think tank, but an actual governing body, with the power to influence and guide the world's largest corporations and nations toward more sustainable, ethical practices. It would include representatives from various industries, technology, environmental science, and even social justice, each with an equal say in the direction of global progress. Elon knew the proposal would be radical. He knew it would face immense opposition. But he also knew that the current system, one that prioritized profits over people, short-term gain over long-term sustainability, was unsustainable. And if there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that real change never came from playing it safe. As expected, the proposal was met with significant resistance. Critics in both the business and political world were quick to dismiss the idea as a pipe dream, a utopian vision that was doomed to fail. Many in the corporate world, especially those invested in traditional industries, saw the idea as a direct threat to their profits and influence. "That's impossible," a leading corporate strategist said in an interview. "No one wants to give up control, least of all the big companies that currently hold all the power. This is nothing more than an attempt to centralize power in the hands of a few, and it will never work." Political leaders, too, expressed skepticism. The idea of a global governance body that transcended national borders and corporate interests was seen as a threat to sovereignty, and many saw it as an overreach by technocrats who didn't understand the complexities of geopolitics. But Elon wasn't deterred. In fact, the opposition only strengthened his resolve. He began to double down on his efforts, taking the fight to the very institutions that were trying to maintain the status quo. A few months later, Elon, Jeff Bezos, and several key members of the New Dawn Initiative traveled to Davos, Switzerland, for the World Economic Forum, a gathering of the world's political, business, and cultural leaders. This was the perfect place to bring their ideas to the global stage, to pitch their vision of a new global framework that could govern technology and the environment in a way that prioritized people and the planet over profit. The atmosphere in Davos was electric. This was a gathering of some of the most powerful people in the world, and for the first time, Elon felt like his vision might have a real shot at becoming a reality. But he also knew it would be a hard sell. The road to change, especially at this scale, was never smooth. He and Bezos presented their proposal to a group of world leaders, CEOs, and environmentalists. The room was full of skepticism, but also curiosity. Elon made his case with his usual intensity, but this time, his pitch wasn't just about technology, it was about humanity's survival. "We stand at a crossroads," Elon began. "We have the technology to transform our world, but we don't have the systems in place to ensure that transformation is sustainable, ethical, and equitable. If we continue down the path of business as usual, we risk further fragmentation and inequality. This is not just a matter of technological advancement, it's a matter of survival. We need a new kind of global governance, one that is transparent, collaborative, and focused on long-term well-being." There was silence in the room. Some nodded, others remained unconvinced. But then, a surprising voice spoke up. It was Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. "Elon," Schwab said, "I've known you for years. You're a visionary, but you've also been a disruptor. This idea of yours is bold, but we cannot afford to ignore the possibility that it might be the solution we've been searching for. It's going to take time, and it's going to take work. But if you're willing to take the first step, we will follow." The room seemed to shift. The words had been spoken, and a door had been opened. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, Elon felt that his vision wasn't just a dream. It could become a reality. In the days that followed the Davos meeting, the reaction was mixed. Some hailed Elon's proposal as visionary, while others criticized it as naive. But one thing was clear. The conversation had shifted. More and more influential leaders began to express interest in the idea of a global governance framework for technology and sustainability. Some even suggested that a coalition could be formed to pilot the initiative in specific regions, starting with smaller-scale projects and then scaling up. For Elon, the real work had just begun. He knew that implementing his vision would require not just the support of the world's most powerful people, but the commitment of ordinary citizens, those who would be most affected by the changes. And as he sat in his office late that night, staring out at the skyline of Silicon Valley, Elon realized that his journey was far from over. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of the unknown. In fact, it was the unknown that drove him forward, because if there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that the greatest changes often come from the most unlikely places. The months that followed the announcement of the Global Coalition for Technological and Environmental Progress were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and unforeseen challenges. Although the idea had been met with some support, it became clear that bringing such a radical vision to life would not be easy. The entrenched powers of global industries, governments, and even environmental organizations proved to be formidable obstacles. Elon knew that this was only the beginning of the fight, and he couldn't afford to falter now. Despite the hurdles, Elon remained undeterred. For years, he had faced similar resistance when he was developing SpaceX and Tesla. From the early days when critics had declared his ideas impossible, to the doubters who thought electric cars and private space exploration were pipe dreams, he had always thrived on proving the skeptics wrong. But this time, the stakes felt different. This time, it wasn't just about creating a revolutionary product or service. It was about changing the way the entire world operated. At the heart of the resistance were several powerful interests. First, there were the global corporations whose profits were deeply tied to the status quo. Fossil fuel companies, traditional automotive giants, and even tech conglomerates with vested interests in old systems began to rally against the proposed governance framework. "We cannot let a few tech billionaires decide the fate of the global economy," said a prominent CEO in an interview. "This proposal is an affront to free markets and will stifle innovation, not foster it." What Elon Musk doesn't understand is that governments should not dictate how businesses operate, especially when it comes to the very technologies that will drive future economic growth. The political opposition was no less fierce. Leaders of countries where traditional industries dominated were quick to dismiss the proposal, warning that any international framework that undermined national sovereignty was a non-starter. "How could we trust technocrats to manage our economic and political affairs?" they asked. "Who would ensure the rights of the working class?" Elon, watching the pushback grow, understood that this wasn't just about technology, it was about power. And the people who held that power weren't going to give it up easily. As the months wore on, the pressure began to take its toll on Elon. He had always been a man of intense drive, but the complexity of the opposition he was now facing, along with the very real stakes of the initiative, began to weigh heavily on his mind. The more he worked on his vision, the more questions arose. Was this really the right course? Was he risking everything for an idea that might not even work? And, perhaps most troubling of all, could the world really change in the way he imagined? There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his sleek modern bedroom, haunted by the sheer scale of what he was attempting to do. The clock was ticking, and the global clock was running out of time. In the midst of this personal turmoil, Elon found himself turning to an unlikely source of solace, his grandmother. It had been several years since he'd spoken with her in person. She had always been his confidant during his childhood, the one person who had grounded him and encouraged him to pursue his passions with abandon. She was, in many ways, the source of his earliest dreams, reminding him that even the impossible was achievable if he was willing to put in the work. One afternoon, Elon decided to visit her in her small house in Palo Alto. The simple, old-fashioned space was in stark contrast to the modern, high-tech world he inhabited. Yet, there was something about being in her presence that felt reassuring. She didn't care about the billions, the companies, or the headlines. She just cared about him, the person, sitting on the porch, with the sun casting long shadows over the lawn. Elon asked her the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Nana," he said, "do you believe that what I'm doing is going to make a difference?" "I'm not sure anymore." She looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "I know you, Elon. You've always had a vision. And sometimes, a vision takes longer than we expect. But if you're asking me whether I think you're capable of changing the world, the answer is yes. I've seen you fight when everyone else told you to stop. You're not in this for the fame or the fortune. You're in it because you believe that the world can be better." Elon listened, but the doubt still lingered in his heart. She continued, sensing his internal struggle. "Don't you remember the stories I told you about your grandfather? He wasn't a man who cared about the world's approval, but he never stopped pushing forward because he believed in something bigger than himself. He didn't have all the answers, but he had the courage to try. That's what matters most. And you, Elon, have that courage. That evening, as he sat quietly on the porch, Elon reflected on his grandmother's words. There, under the fading light of the setting sun, something in him shifted. He realized that the world's approval or disapproval was irrelevant to the larger mission he had set out to accomplish. What mattered wasn't whether the path was easy or whether it was filled with resistance. It was about the greater good he was striving for. The world needed a new way forward, one that prioritized sustainability, equity, and shared progress. No matter how hard the fight, Elon was more certain than ever that this was the only path worth following. The next day, he called together a team of his closest advisors and began drafting a new approach, a more resilient, more transparent strategy for the global coalition for technological and environmental progress. He knew it would take time to convince the world's most powerful interests, but the vision was too important to abandon. Elon's renewed sense of purpose energized the team. They worked tirelessly to refine the framework, incorporating feedback from skeptics, critics, and even those who had initially opposed the proposal. The goal was not just to create a governance structure for the future, it was to ensure that it was as inclusive and practical as possible. To make it work, the framework needed to address the concerns of industries, governments, and people from all walks of life. As they refined the proposal, Elon also began to work on building more grassroots support. It wasn't enough to have the approval of the elite. The people needed to believe in the vision, too. Through public speaking engagements, interviews, and social media, Elon reached out to communities around the world, talking about the need for a more equitable, sustainable future. It wasn't an easy sell. Many still saw the New Dawn initiative as another lofty ideal, something that couldn't possibly work in the real world. But Elon was persistent, and slowly, through tireless campaigning and the unwavering belief in his mission, the tide began to shift. In the quiet moments between meetings and strategic sessions, Elon allowed himself to dream again. He thought about his grandmother's words, the stories she told him about his grandfather's own struggles and triumphs. He thought about how, despite everything, he had always found a way to keep moving forward. Even when things seemed impossible, the world wasn't going to change overnight. There would be setbacks. There would be resistance. But Elon had learned an invaluable lesson over the years. Real change takes time, and real progress demands resilience. As he stood at the edge of a new chapter in his life, Elon Musk knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But he was ready to face them. He had a mission, and he was determined to see it through. As Elon moved into the next phase of the global coalition for technological and environmental progress, the landscape began to change. What had once seemed like an impossibly lofty goal, an international framework for governing technological advancement and environmental stewardship, was slowly transforming into a more tangible reality. There was still opposition, of course, but something had shifted. The conversations had evolved. More and more voices, even those of former skeptics, began to express interest in the proposal. Elon had learned early on that the key to achieving his vision wasn't just about creating the best technology, it was about forging the right alliances. And he knew that, just like with Tesla and SpaceX, the early stages would require an army of believers who would push through the barriers with him. One of the most unexpected allies to join Elon's cause came from the world of media. Adrian Young, a well-known journalist and founder of the influential online platform The New Vision, had been a vocal critic of Elon's earlier ventures. Young had often criticized Elon for his techno-utopian ideas, arguing that they ignored the complexities of the real world. However, after covering the escalating climate crisis and the growing public interest in sustainable technology, Young began to see things differently. She reached out to Elon, requesting an interview to discuss his plans for the global coalition. At first, Elon hesitated. He had grown wary of journalists who were more interested in sensationalism than real solutions. But something about Yang's message piqued his curiosity. When they met, the conversation quickly became deeper than either had anticipated. Yang, with her sharp mind and sense of ethical responsibility, didn't shy away from challenging Elon, but she also recognized the magnitude of what he was trying to achieve. "Your idea is revolutionary," she said, "but it's also incredibly risky. A global governance framework for technological progress? It sounds like the kind of thing people write dystopian novels about. So, why should the world trust you? Elon paused, considering her question. Because the alternative is worse. If we don't regulate and guide our technological progress, we risk irreparably harming our planet and society. History has shown us that we cannot afford to repeat the same mistakes. The world is changing, and we must change with it. Yang was taken aback by the raw sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she began to see the urgency behind his ideas. She had always been a champion of accountability, of questioning the status quo, but she couldn't deny that Elon's vision wasn't just a pipe dream. It was a response to a very real, very pressing crisis. "I'll help," she said, her voice firm. "I'll help tell this story, but you need to make it more than just a collection of ideas. It needs to be actionable. You need to show the world how this can actually work." From that moment, Yang became one of the most powerful advocates for Elon's cause. Through her platform, The New Vision, she was able to amplify Elon's message in a way he hadn't been able to before. The audience she reached was vast: young activists, policymakers, scientists, and business leaders who might not have heard Elon's story otherwise. Yang's coverage of Elon's initiative sparked a ripple effect that led to a public awakening. The general public, long accustomed to hearing about technology in the context of Silicon Valley's relentless pursuit of profit, began to see a new kind of tech leader emerging. A leader who wasn't just pushing for innovation but also for accountability and ethical responsibility. The media campaign she spearheaded focused on the human element of Elon's vision. It wasn't just about advanced technology, but about people's lives and the long-term future of the planet. It featured stories of communities devastated by climate change, of workers displaced by industries that failed to adapt to a changing world, and of young people who were demanding a seat at the table when it came to their future. The reaction was overwhelming. Social media buzzed with conversations about the New Dawn initiative, and citizens across the globe began voicing their support. What had once been a niche conversation had now become part of the mainstream dialogue. People wanted answers to the pressing issues of our time. How do we combat climate change? How do we ensure that technology works for everyone, not just the wealthy few? How do we prevent the exploitation of workers and resources as we advance? Elon's vision, once viewed with skepticism, was now being discussed as a viable solution to some of the world's most urgent problems. While the public was warming up to the idea, the real breakthrough came when certain political leaders began to take notice. In particular, a number of progressive lawmakers in Europe and the US started to see the merit in Elon's vision for a global governance framework. Elon was invited to speak before the United Nations, where world leaders gathered to discuss the future of the planet. His speech was impassioned and direct. "We are on the brink of an irreversible crisis," Elon said, standing before the Assembly of Nations. "Our planet is suffering, our resources are being depleted, and our systems of governance are ill-equipped to handle the scale of the challenges we face. We cannot afford to let national borders or corporate interests dictate the future. We must build a global coalition that places people and the planet above all else. It is not a choice, it is a necessity." The response was mixed. Some leaders were immediately receptive, nodding in agreement with Elon's words. Others, however, were skeptical, citing concerns about the feasibility of such a global framework. The U.S. president, in particular, was hesitant, arguing that the sovereignty of nations needed to be preserved and that global governance could threaten democratic institutions. But even with the pushback, the conversation had shifted. The mere fact that Elon Musk, a private citizen, was addressing the United Nations on issues of such global importance signaled a tectonic shift in the way the world was thinking about the intersection of technology, politics, and the environment. Elon knew that to win over these leaders, he would need to offer more than just lofty ideals. He needed to present actionable solutions, plans that showed how his vision could be implemented practically and effectively. This was no longer just a matter of convincing the public or the media. It was about aligning the interests of governments, industries, and communities. With growing support came growing pressure. Elon found himself under constant scrutiny by the media, by political leaders, and by the public. Every misstep, every minor failure, was magnified. The stakes had never been higher. One evening, as he sat in his office at Tesla headquarters, reviewing a set of proposals from the team, he received an unexpected call. It was from his grandmother, Nana. "Elon, how are you doing, dear?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "I'm doing all right," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "It's just a lot. A lot of people are watching now. It's a huge responsibility." She paused for a moment, and then said something that struck him deeply. "You know, dear, you've always wanted to change the world. But remember, change doesn't happen all at once. It happens bit by bit, and sometimes it's the small steps that make the biggest difference. Don't lose sight of why you started this in the first place. It's not about winning every battle. It's about staying true to the cause." Elon smiled, feeling a surge of clarity wash over him. His grandmother was right. He had always believed in the power of persistence. No matter how hard the road, no matter how steep the climb, he had to keep moving forward. The world was ready for change, and it was his job to lead the charge. As Elon hung up the phone, he looked out over the city, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The world was at a crossroads, and his vision for a sustainable, inclusive future was beginning to take root. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that the tide had already begun to turn. More people were beginning to see the need for change. And if there was one thing Elon Musk had always known how to do, it was to seize an opportunity when it came knocking. The New Dawn Initiative was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a movement. As the New Dawn Initiative gained more traction, so did the backlash. With the momentum Elon had managed to build came an intensity of resistance that had only escalated. The media outlets that had once praised his efforts began to voice growing concerns about the feasibility of his global framework. Leading politicians took to social media and television, speaking against what they deemed an overreach of private influence in global governance. The narrative, once hopeful and inspiring, was now being framed as reckless and even dangerous. In the U.S., conservative lawmakers doubled down on their criticism. "What we're seeing here is a power grab," one prominent senator stated on national television. "This man is not elected by anyone. He's a billionaire with his own interests at heart, trying to change the way we run our entire economy. This is the kind of overreach that will destroy capitalism and democracy as we know it." The accusations were harsh, but they were also effective. The idea of a global coalition controlled by tech billionaires struck a chord with many who were wary of powerful individuals wielding too much influence. The rhetoric from both sides of the political spectrum began to shift toward a sense of fear. Fear that Elon Musk's vision wasn't a hopeful path to a sustainable future, but a dystopian world where decisions were made by unelected corporate elites with no checks on their power. Meanwhile, industry giants who had once quietly sat on the sidelines now openly voiced their opposition. The fossil fuel industry, still wielding enormous power in global politics, began to fund campaigns against the New Dawn Initiative. Ads aired across the world painting Elon Musk as a naive dreamer who had no understanding of the real-world implications of his ideas. Others focused on the risks to jobs, claiming that the shift to sustainable technologies would cause mass unemployment. Elon couldn't ignore the weight of the criticism. Every day, new articles appeared calling him out for being too idealistic or out of touch. His strategy to push forward, to show the world that this was the future they needed, was becoming increasingly difficult to execute. He couldn't afford to back down, but it was clear that the opposition wasn't just going to go away. Amidst the political and media storm, Elon began to feel the toll on his personal life. His relationships with family and close friends, once his source of strength, were strained. His children, although understanding of his work, began to voice their concerns about the amount of time he spent away from them. The same with his longtime partner, Grimes. "I never signed up for this," Grimes confessed one evening, her voice tinged with frustration. "I get that you're trying to save the world, Elon, but this constant pressure, it's changing you. You're always in your head, always working, and we barely see you." Elon was silent for a moment. He knew she was right, but how could he explain that it wasn't just about him anymore? He had a vision, a purpose that seemed to outweigh everything else. Yet, as the tension between his personal life and his global mission continued to build, he couldn't help but wonder if he was losing sight of the things that truly mattered. Despite the onslaught of criticism, A moment came when things began to shift, an unexpected breakthrough in the form of a key political ally. Senator Maria Alvarez, a rising star in American politics, had been watching the developments with a more critical eye than most. An environmental advocate at heart, she had initially been skeptical of Elon's sweeping vision, but had come to appreciate his relentless drive and his focus on sustainability. With the backing of a growing base of younger voters and environmentalists, Senator Alvarez saw the potential for Elon's vision to align with her own goals for climate action and equitable technology. It was no secret that Alvarez had ambitions to run for the presidency in the upcoming elections, but she realized that her platform could benefit greatly from aligning with Elon's cause. In a private meeting in Washington, D.C., she shared her thoughts with Elon. "I've been following your initiative closely," Senator Alvarez said, "and I'll be honest, I didn't always believe in your approach. But after seeing the numbers, after talking to the people who are working on the ground level, I believe it can work. I think we can get this passed, but it's going to take more than just the vision. It's going to take strategic partnerships, political influence, and the right messaging." Elon, although hesitant, knew this was the opening he'd been waiting for. With the right political backing, his initiative could move forward. But it was clear. He needed allies, strategic, political, and powerful. And Senator Alvarez, with her growing influence and dedication to environmental justice, was just the ally he needed. Together, Elon and Senator Alvarez devised a plan. The first step was to refocus the conversation. The media narrative needed to shift from Elon Musk's vision to global collaboration for the future. They needed to frame the initiative as a collective effort, a movement, not a singular push by a billionaire with a grand idea. It was about inclusivity, about creating a future that worked for everyone. Elon, Senator Alvarez, and their teams spent weeks crafting the messaging. They put together a proposal for a joint global climate summit where world leaders, activists, and business moguls could come together to discuss a unified approach to addressing climate change, technological advancement, and the transition to a greener, more sustainable future. The summit would not only serve as a political bargaining chip for Alvarez's own presidential aspirations, but it would also be a platform where Elon could showcase the practical benefits of his initiative, an opportunity to reframe the conversation and shift the public's focus from fear to hope. The summit was announced with fanfare, with politicians, activists, and leaders from around the world confirming their attendance. What was expected to be a series of tense negotiations quickly became something far more powerful. The event, hosted in New York City, was a dazzling affair. But behind the glitz and glamour, the stakes were real. This summit had the potential to determine the future of the planet. Elon spoke first. He took the stage, his usual stoic demeanor replaced with a sense of urgency and hope. The room fell silent as he spoke. "The challenges we face today are unprecedented, but they are not insurmountable. This is not a time for division. It's a time for cooperation. Every one of us in this room has a part to play. The technology exists, the will exists, and most importantly, the need exists. What we must do is come together, governments, industries, activists, and individuals, to build a future that is not just about economic growth, but about sustainable progress for all of humanity. We are on the brink of a new era, and it's time to act." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't a revolution, but it was the beginning of something larger than any one individual or corporation. Senator Alvarez followed with a rousing speech on the importance of collaboration, not just for the environment but for the future of global stability. She painted a picture of a world where technology served the people, where the transition to sustainable industries would create jobs and opportunities for all, not just the elite. The summit wasn't the end of the struggle. There were still significant hurdles to overcome: political maneuvering, economic challenges, and fierce opposition. But for the first time in months, Elon felt the first real sense of hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but now there was a collective vision. A vision that was shared by more people than ever before. For the first time, the idea that the world could be remade wasn't a distant dream. It was a possibility, a reality they could fight for, together. The summit in New York City marked a historic turning point for the New Dawn initiative, but the road ahead was never going to be easy. While the event itself was a success in terms of media attention and diplomatic support, The real challenge lay in turning the words spoken at the summit into concrete action. The political and economic landscape was a minefield of old alliances, corporate interests, and entrenched power structures. Elon knew that for every ally gained, there was an equal, if not greater, resistance waiting to push back. In the weeks following the summit, there was a clear shift in global discourse. Governments, particularly in Europe, began to view the New Dawn Initiative not as a political threat, but as a necessary framework for the future. Climate change was no longer a distant issue. It was here, right now, in the form of rising seas, catastrophic weather events, and failing ecosystems. The urgency had become undeniable. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to draft detailed proposals for the global coalition structure. They focused on practical steps, creating a universal system of technological regulations, investing in renewable energy infrastructure, and establishing global incentives for businesses that adhered to sustainable practices. For every country that signed on, there was another that hesitated, citing concerns over national sovereignty or the economic cost of transitioning to green technologies. But with each new agreement, the momentum built, and the dream of a cooperative global approach to technology and the environment began to feel more possible. One of the most promising developments was the creation of the Global Sustainability Fund, a multi-billion-dollar initiative to provide financial support to developing countries that were struggling with the costs of implementing green technology. By leveraging the financial power of global tech companies, the fund would act as a bridge to help poorer nations transition to sustainable practices without sacrificing their economic growth. As the initiative gained ground, it also attracted attention from the world's largest corporations. Companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, long seen as rivals in the tech space, began to consider the long-term implications of their operations and, for the first time in a generation, began aligning their missions with the goals of the New Dawn Initiative. Elon's ability to create alliances across industries, sectors, and borders was proving to be a masterstroke. But the excitement of success was short-lived. The moment of victory came with a gut-wrenching twist. Elon discovered that someone within his own inner circle was working against him. It started with a rumor, a whispered comment from a trusted advisor who had recently been acting strangely. When Elon confronted her, Maria Vasquez, his chief strategy officer, at first denied anything was wrong. But the evidence soon came to light. Maria had been secretly in talks with a group of corporate executives who were looking to undermine the New Dawn Initiative by launching a competing, private sector-led solution. They promised to work faster, be more flexible, and, most importantly, retain control over the technologies they were developing. The plan was simple: undermine the global coalition, fracture the support, and bring a new solution to the table, one that would benefit the corporations more than the global population. Elon felt a deep sense of betrayal, more so because Maria had been one of his earliest supporters. They had worked together for years, from the early days of Tesla to the foundation of SpaceX. To see her turn against him, to see her put personal and corporate ambition above the greater good, hit him harder than he had expected. Confronting her in his office was an emotional moment. Maria, who had always been cool-headed and composed, was visibly shaken. She knew she had crossed a line, but her loyalty had been pulled in different directions by the massive pressures of the corporate world. She spoke, but her words were soft, filled with regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Maria said, her voice breaking. "The coalition, it's too slow, Elon. It's too big, too unwieldy. We're fighting for a better future, but we can't afford to wait while everything crumbles around us. I believed in you, but I also believed in what we could do, faster, more efficiently. Maybe too much." Elon didn't respond immediately. His mind was a swirl of thoughts, betrayal, disbelief, and a deep sorrow that someone he trusted had become an obstacle to his vision. "You betrayed everything we've worked for," Elon finally said, his voice steady but filled with pain. "This isn't about efficiency. It's about building something lasting. If we don't work together, if we don't put people before profits, then we're no better than the systems we're trying to replace." Maria's face flushed with guilt, and she took a step back, her expression unreadable. "I never meant for it to go this far, Elon," she whispered. "But sometimes, you have to take risks. You've always been a risk taker." Maybe this was one gamble too many. Without another word, Elon walked out of the room. Maria's betrayal would haunt him, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let it derail everything they had worked for. The stakes were too high. The news of Maria's actions leaked to the press within days. Publicly, she remained silent, but the damage was done. The media latched onto the story, using it as a weapon to further discredit the New Dawn initiative. Headlines read, Elon Musk faces betrayal from trusted inner circle and New Dawn initiative faces infighting as key strategist turns against Musk. Once again, Elon was being portrayed as a flawed leader, someone who couldn't control his own organization. But privately, the betrayal sparked a fire in Elon. He knew that the fight had just become even harder, but he wasn't backing down. It was time to prove that the New Dawn initiative wasn't just his vision. It was a global movement, one that couldn't be undone by the actions of a single person. As he sat in his office, staring at the reports and the upcoming meetings, a realization washed over him. Maria's departure, though painful, had given him something invaluable: clarity. The world was watching, and the pressure was immense, but this was the moment to take everything they had built to the next level. Elon reached out to the key figures in the global coalition. He didn't sugarcoat the situation. He told them everything: the betrayal, the media onslaught, the cracks beginning to show. But he also reminded them why they were in this together: to build a better future, no matter the obstacles. If we falter now, Elon told them, we risk losing everything. But if we stand together, if we push forward, we have a chance. We owe it to the generations that will follow us. The response was overwhelming. The coalition members, now a diverse mix of scientists, activists, politicians, and industry leaders, rallied around Elon. They too believed in the cause, and they understood that betrayal, while painful, was nothing new in the fight for change. Every great movement had its setbacks, its moments of doubt. What mattered now was how they responded. Elon and his team went back to the drawing board, reworking their messaging, tightening their focus, and preparing for the next major step in the New Dawn initiative. It would require not just technical solutions, but a renewed commitment to unity and global cooperation. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a while, Elon felt a sense of resolve. He had been tested, and he had come out stronger. The coalition was more than just a collection of individuals. It was a shared mission, and nothing, not even betrayal, could take that away. The media storm surrounding Maria Vasquez's betrayal was far from over. Headlines continued to churn with sensationalized stories about the infighting within the New Dawn initiative. Elon Musk's name, once a symbol of innovation and progress, was now being used in the same breath as failure and scandal. Even supporters of the initiative began to waver, uncertain about the future. With so much at stake, the pressure on Elon intensified to levels he had never faced before. But he wasn't ready to let this setback define him or the movement. In the wake of Maria's defection, Elon knew he needed to regain control of the narrative. The New Dawn initiative wasn't just about one person. It was about a movement that had spread across the globe, transcending the ambitions of any individual. While the betrayal had wounded him personally, he could no longer afford to dwell on it. His focus had to be on the larger goal: saving the planet, fostering global cooperation, and building a future that was sustainable for generations to come. The first step in this process was a series of high-profile meetings with key figures in the global coalition. These were not just formal discussions, but heartfelt conversations. Elon needed to reconnect with them on a personal level, remind them why they were here, and reaffirm their shared vision. He traveled to Berlin, where the European Union's leaders were gathered to discuss the next phase of the Global Sustainability Fund. The room was tense when Elon walked in. The previous events had raised doubts, even among those who had once been his strongest allies. But rather than go into damage control mode, Elon took a different approach. He spoke honestly about the challenges they faced. Not just the opposition from powerful corporate lobbies, but the internal fractures that had threatened to tear them apart. I know the road ahead is harder than we ever imagined, Elon began. We've faced setbacks, personal betrayals, and public scrutiny. But we're not backing down. We can't. This isn't just about technology or policies. It's about the future we want to leave for our children. And that's why I'm asking you to stay with me. Together, we can make this work. It's not going to be easy, But nothing worth having ever is. The room fell silent. One by one, leaders from the EU, Asia, and Africa spoke, voicing their commitment to the initiative. They were tired of waiting for the perfect conditions. They knew that they were in this for the long haul, and that Elon, despite his flaws and missteps, was the only person capable of leading this global effort. By the end of the meeting, a renewed sense of determination filled the room. The coalition had been shaken, but it wasn't broken. They were ready to fight for the future, and they would do so as a united front. Elon knew that if the New Dawn initiative was going to have any hope of succeeding, they needed to change the way the media portrayed him and the movement. He called a meeting with his public relations team, a group that had been working tirelessly to manage the fallout from the scandal. "We need to get ahead of the narrative," Elon said, pacing the room. "We've been playing defense for too long. Let's go on the offensive. We need a new campaign. A campaign that shows people what this is really about. Not just my name or our technologies, but the people who are fighting for this vision. The farmers in Africa who are finally able to use sustainable practices, the factory workers in the US who are transitioning to green jobs, the families whose homes are safer because of the technologies we're building." The media team got to work quickly. They launched a global media blitz that centered not on Elon Musk, but on the people behind the New Dawn initiative. They aired documentaries, social media campaigns, and news segments showcasing the real-world impact of the movement. They featured stories of individuals whose lives had been transformed by the global sustainability efforts, farmers who had increased crop yields by adopting new sustainable agricultural technologies, families in developing nations who had gained access to clean water through renewable energy solutions, and workers who had received new job training in green industries. The message was clear. This was not just about one person or a single idea. It was about a collective effort to build a better future, and it was already making a tangible impact. As the media campaign gained traction, the tide began to shift. Public opinion, which had been wavering, began to turn in Elon's favor. The New Dawn initiative wasn't just a far-off dream anymore. It was a reality that was already changing lives, and more people were beginning to see it as the only way forward. The global coalition, now more unified than ever, began to push forward with the next phase of their plans. With financial backing from the Global Sustainability Fund and the political support of key governments, the initiative began rolling out large-scale projects across the world. In the United States, a network of clean energy plants was being constructed. In Africa, new solar-powered water purification systems were deployed. In Southeast Asia, local governments were being trained in sustainable farming techniques. Elon knew that these early wins were important, but the real challenge lay in maintaining momentum. He began to focus more on grassroots engagement, pushing for a global green revolution that would involve everyday people in the transformation. It was time for the world to act. The message became clear. Everyone had a role to play. Whether it was supporting the transition to clean energy, advocating for sustainable policies, or simply changing personal habits to reduce consumption, the fight for the future was one that required all hands on deck. Amid the chaos, Elon also found time to reconnect with his family. His relationship with Grimes had been strained, but they both knew they needed to prioritize their connection, especially as the weight of the world's expectations weighed on him. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, he sat down with her in their home. "I've been so consumed by all of this," Elon admitted, his voice low. "I've let it take over everything. I've barely been there for you and the kids, and I can't keep doing that. I want to be a good partner, a good father. I want to find balance." Grimes looked at him for a long moment before responding. "You're doing something incredible, Elon. But I need you too. We all do. It's not just about saving the world. It's about us, the people closest to you. We're in this together, and you need to remember that. I can't do this alone. We have to be in this as a team." Elon nodded, a sense of clarity settling over him. He had been so focused on the grand vision, on the global fight for a sustainable future, that he had forgotten about the importance of the immediate world around him. His family, his friends, the people who loved him. It was a hard lesson, but it was one he needed to learn. As the months went by, the New Dawn initiative began to pick up more and more steam. The coalition had survived its first major crisis, and now, with a renewed sense of unity, they were ready to take on the larger challenges. Elon, though scarred by betrayal and personal sacrifice, had rediscovered his purpose. The journey ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but he was no longer alone. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that the impossible might just be within reach. The New Dawn initiative was gaining momentum, but as Elon had learned, the road to global transformation was anything but smooth. Despite the early successes and the broad support of many governments and corporations, the initiative still faced resistance from powerful factions. Corporate interests, entrenched political systems, and skeptical public opinion all threatened to derail their progress. But Elon knew that their vision was too important to give up. The world was watching, and now was the time to prove that this movement could overcome any obstacle. In the weeks following the global media campaign and the positive reception of the initial sustainability projects, Elon and his team faced the first signs of serious pushback. The media, once enamored with the success of the New Dawn initiative, began shifting its tone. Powerful industry leaders, particularly from the fossil fuel sector, were increasing their efforts to discredit the movement. They launched smear campaigns aimed at creating doubt about the initiative's viability. Some claimed that the global push for clean energy would bankrupt nations, while others argued that it was a naive, utopian vision that would never be able to deliver on its promises. Elon could see the writing on the wall. This wasn't just about technology or policy anymore. The New Dawn initiative was challenging the very foundations of power in the global economy. The fossil fuel industry, banking giants, and other corporate titans stood to lose billions if the initiative succeeded. They would do whatever it took to maintain the status quo. But Elon had always been a disruptor. He thrived on challenges. If anything, these threats only fueled his resolve. The question now was how to engage with this growing resistance while keeping the movement focused on its long-term goals. In a bold move, Elon decided that they couldn't afford to wait for the opposition to wear themselves out. It was time to take the fight directly to the corporations that were most actively working against the initiative. One of the most prominent targets was the fossil fuel industry's largest conglomerate, Titan Energy. Titan had already begun circulating misinformation about the feasibility of the New Dawn initiative, portraying it as a technological fantasy and claiming that the world's energy infrastructure was too entrenched in fossil fuels to make the transition. Elon knew they needed to challenge Titan head-on. He called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. The plan was risky. Titan had immense financial power and a strong political network, but if they could expose Titan's true intentions, greed over sustainability, it would send a powerful message to the world. "We need to put the pressure on them, publicly," Elon said, leaning forward in his chair. "We can't let them manipulate the narrative anymore. Let's show the world what they're really doing behind closed doors. It's time to turn the spotlight on Titan Energy." The team worked tirelessly for weeks, pulling together a detailed exposé on Titan Energy's internal lobbying efforts, their financial backing of climate denial organizations, and their influence over global politicians. Elon even used social media to go after Titan's leadership, highlighting their connections to fossil fuel interests and questioning their commitment to the planet's future. It wasn't long before the story hit the headlines. The media picked up the exposé, and within days, Titan Energy was embroiled in a public relations nightmare. Their stock prices plummeted, and their executives were forced to make public statements denying the allegations, but the damage was done. The world saw Titan for what it was, a corporate giant more concerned with profits than the planet's future. Elon had made his mark. While the exposé on Titan Energy was a significant victory, it came with a price. The political backlash was swift and fierce. Senators and governors from states with heavy reliance on fossil fuel industries, including Texas and West Virginia, came out against the New Dawn initiative, accusing it of trying to destroy jobs and cripple entire economies. "Jobs will be lost. Families will suffer," they cried in public statements. "Elon Musk is trying to impose his green agenda on us, without regard for the American workers who rely on these industries." The debate turned bitter, with some media outlets running op-eds framing Musk as an out-of-touch billionaire trying to impose his will on working-class Americans. The attack was personal, accusing Elon of abandoning the very people who had helped fuel his rise to success. In Washington, the fight over climate policy reached a boiling point. The Senate was split down the middle, with one side pushing for the continued expansion of green technologies and the other fiercely defending the status quo. As hearings began, Elon was called to testify before Congress. It was his moment to face the opposition head-on. The day of the testimony was a media circus. Cameras flashed as Elon made his way to the hearing room, flanked by security and a team of advisors. Politicians who had been vocal in their opposition to the New Dawn initiative were ready to challenge him, eager to paint him as an out-of-touch billionaire. But Elon wasn't intimidated. He had faced far tougher critics in his life. This was just another obstacle. The questioning was intense. Senators asked pointed questions about job losses, the feasibility of green energy, and the costs of implementing a global sustainability program. Some of their questions were loaded, designed to paint him as someone detached from the reality of everyday Americans. How do you respond to critics who say that your green agenda will put millions of workers out of a job? One senator asked, glaring at Elon. Elon took a deep breath before responding. I understand the fear, but we're not here to destroy jobs. We're here to create new opportunities. The green revolution is already creating jobs, thousands of them. Through new clean energy infrastructure, sustainable farming, and cutting-edge technologies that will power the economy of tomorrow. The problem isn't that we need to stop, it's that we need to start now before we're too late. His answer was calm, but powerful. He spoke with conviction about the future, about the need to invest in the people who would build the future, those who would work in the green industries of tomorrow. Look at the coal miners, Elon continued. Many of them have been displaced by technology and automation for years. The question isn't whether they'll lose their jobs, it's what we do next. We need to invest in their future, provide them with the training, the tools, the opportunities they need to thrive in a green economy. The room fell silent. It was an impassioned plea, one that acknowledged the legitimate fears of workers while making it clear that the New Dawn initiative wasn't about ignoring those concerns. It was about transforming them into a new kind of economy. The testimony didn't change everyone's mind, but it did shift the conversation. Elon was no longer just the controversial tech mogul with big ideas. He was a leader, a visionary who was facing the challenges head-on. The media, for the first time in weeks, began to shift the focus from his flaws to his solutions. The New Dawn initiative was no longer just a utopian dream. It was a real, tangible plan for the future. The political pressure didn't let up, but with each passing day, the momentum for green policies continued to build. More countries signed on to the New Dawn initiative, and corporations that had once been skeptical began to realize that the shift to green energy wasn't just inevitable, it was profitable. The green revolution was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. Elon's vision for the future, despite the resistance, was starting to come to fruition. The New Dawn initiative was now a global force, and while the obstacles were still enormous, the world was beginning to change. The question, now, wasn't whether it would succeed. It was how quickly it could succeed. The next few years would determine the fate of the planet, and Elon was determined to lead the charge, no matter the cost. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, some personal, some political, some environmental. But for the first time in years, Elon felt as though the stars were aligning. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The journey had been long. The betrayals, the pressure, the battles, both public and private, had taken a toll on Elon Musk. Yet, despite the setbacks, there was a quiet sense of triumph in the air as the world began to turn toward the future he had always dreamed of, one that wasn't shaped by short-term greed, but by the enduring values of sustainability, hope, and collective effort. The New Dawn initiative was no longer just an idea, it was the future. And Elon had been the one to ignite the spark that would set it ablaze. It had taken years of tireless work, relentless campaigning, and building alliances across the globe, but the moment was finally here. The Global Sustainability Accord. World leaders, from the United States to China, from the EU to Brazil, came together to sign a historic agreement, committing their nations to bold climate action, transitioning to green energy, and investing in technologies that would ensure a sustainable future for all. Elon stood in the front row, flanked by key leaders and scientists, watching as the ink dried on the document that would reshape the future. The room was filled with a quiet sense of triumph, an achievement of unparalleled magnitude. This wasn't just about carbon emissions or renewable energy. It was about the survival of the planet and the acknowledgement that humanity had a shared responsibility to protect it. The Accord was a comprehensive plan that outlined specific goals for reducing carbon footprints, investing in clean technologies, and transitioning away from fossil fuels. It called for the creation of a global green infrastructure, focusing on education, green jobs, and international cooperation. For the first time in history, the world's most powerful nations had aligned on a common purpose: saving the planet. It was a moment Elon knew would define the next generation, but he also understood that this was just the beginning. The hard work was only beginning. As the cameras flashed, Elon slipped away from the media frenzy. He walked outside to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The evening sky was a warm pink, the setting sun casting a soft glow across the landscape. For a moment, the noise of the world seemed to fade away. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The long nights, the painful losses, the personal sacrifices. He thought about his children, his family, the loved ones who had stood by him through everything. For all the technological advances, all the innovations he had created, it was these relationships that had kept him grounded. Grimes had been there through it all, supporting him, challenging him, reminding him of what really mattered. Despite the public battles, despite the pressures of the world, they had found their way back to each other. Their relationship, like his work, had evolved. He had learned, perhaps for the first time, the importance of balance. The family, the personal connections, the moments of stillness and reflection. These were what truly anchored him. But it wasn't just about the people close to him. Elon thought about the farmers in India who now had access to solar-powered irrigation, the families in Africa with clean drinking water thanks to renewable energy, and the communities that had been empowered by the green jobs created by the New Dawn Initiative. This was what he had always wanted: to create a future where no one was left behind, where everyone had a chance at a better life. He had finally seen the vision come to life. The Global Sustainability Accord was signed, but there were still challenges ahead. The true test would be in the execution of the plan, in turning these ambitious goals into concrete action. As the years passed, Elon found himself turning to an unexpected ally, Maria Vasquez. After her departure from the New Dawn Initiative, Maria had retreated from the public eye, but she hadn't vanished. In the quiet of her reflection, she came to realize that her betrayal, though born from a sense of personal ambition, had been a mistake. The future of the world wasn't something to control. It was something to build together. After a long and often uncomfortable period of self-reflection, Maria reached out to Elon. He, in turn, welcomed her back, not with resentment, but with a recognition that redemption was possible. Maria's skills, her brilliance, and her experience were too valuable to ignore, especially as the global initiative moved into the next phase. Together, they restructured the leadership team of the New Dawn Initiative, with Maria taking on a new role that allowed her to contribute meaningfully to the mission. It was a chance for redemption, not just for her, but for the movement itself. The dynamic between Elon and Maria had shifted, but there was mutual respect now, a recognition of the mistakes made and the lessons learned. The world had started to change in ways that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The New Dawn Initiative had created a global ecosystem of green technologies, sustainable practices, and eco-friendly industries that were helping to rebuild economies and restore the environment. New innovations in solar, wind, and geothermal energy were becoming the backbone of nations' power grids. The widespread use of AI and blockchain technology in supply chains had drastically reduced waste and increased efficiency. There were now entire cities built on sustainability, designed from the ground up with the environment in mind. Elon stood before a new generation of engineers, scientists, and innovators at the New Dawn Global Summit. It was a gathering of the world's brightest minds, all united by the shared goal of creating a better world. The energy in the room was palpable. There was a sense of possibility, a shared belief that humanity could overcome its greatest challenges. "We're standing on the shoulders of giants," Elon said in his keynote speech. "The work we do today will shape the world our children inherit. Our task is not just to create new technologies or solutions. It's to create a world where sustainability is the baseline, where every decision we make, every action we take, is guided by the knowledge that we are responsible for each other and for this planet." As he spoke, he looked out over the sea of faces. It wasn't just about the future of technology. It was about the future of humanity itself. For the first time in his life, Elon realized that the world wasn't just waiting for the next big idea from a single visionary. The world was a collective force, a mass of people who were finally willing to rise to the occasion and fight for their future. Years passed, and the New Dawn initiative continued to grow, evolving with the world around it. New technologies emerged, challenges were overcome, and global partnerships flourished. The old world, defined by its reliance on fossil fuels, environmental destruction, and greed, was becoming a distant memory. Elon's legacy was not just in the companies he had built or the technologies he had invented, but in the world he had helped create. He had sparked a revolution, not through force, but through vision, collaboration, and unwavering determination. The Earth was healing, slowly but surely, and for the first time in centuries, there was hope. Elon's eyes wandered across the horizon as he stood by the window of his office at the New Dawn Global headquarters. The sun was setting on a new era. The world was still facing challenges. There would always be challenges. But the difference now was that humanity was facing them together. They had learned the greatest lesson of all, that the future, no matter how uncertain, was a gift to be shaped by those who were willing to rise above their differences and build something greater. And as Elon Musk watched the world transform, he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?